This happened at the very end of 6th grade, on the last day of school before summer break. I only lived 5 minutes from the school, and since I knew the neighborhood really well, I decided to take a shortcut home this day, something that I had done before, but this time I chose a different route through a part of the neighborhood that I'd never actually walked through before. So, it was a quiet street, kind of off to the side, I guess, and it had this weird abandoned sort of feel to it. Some of the houses looked empty, like no one had lived in them for quite a long time. There weren't any people around. The whole street just gave me weird vibes from the beginning, but I figured that I'd be fine. I mean, again, I was close to home. As I was walking on the sidewalk past these empty houses, I noticed a car parked on the side of the road up ahead. The driver's side door was wide open. I couldn't tell if someone was in it at first, and honestly, I didn't want to find out anyway. I don't like being approached by strangers, especially adults when I'm alone. So I did what most people probably would do. I pulled out my phone and I pretended to be on it so that I wouldn't have to engage with anyone. But as I got closer to the car, I heard a man's voice. Excuse me. I glanced over, and that was when my heart dropped. There was a man sitting in the driver's seat, and he looked just like my substitute teacher that I had had that year. Same build, same face, even the same missing tooth. But his eyes were pitch black. I'm not exaggerating one bit too. There was no white, no visible iris at all, just full-on pure black eyes. And somehow they looked natural, like that's how his eyes were supposed to be. It didn't look like contacts or anything fake. It was just wrong though. The moment that our eyes met, I froze. I didn't say a single word. I just turned and I sprinted home as fast as I could. I didn't even look back. I still remember the way my body felt too. My stomach dropped and my chest got tight, like something was seriously wrong. The weirdest part though is that I had just learned about the black-eyed children and black-eyed people not long before this happened. I didn't even fully believe in them yet or anything, so to have something like this happen right after I learned about them, it really messed with me for quite some time. I'm 19 now and I still think about this quite often. People say that black-eyed people come back to visit you, and to be honest, I've been scared of that for, well, years now. I don't know if what I saw was really one of them or something else, but I know that whatever happened that day, it wasn't normal. And I know that it wasn't my teacher too. It just, well, it looked exactly like him. I've never told many people about this because I know that it sounds so unbelievable and unreal, but to the day that I die, I will swear on everything that it happened. This is a completely true story, and just happened an hour ago. I wanted to talk about it somewhere, and really the only place that I could think of was, well, here. So, for context, my wife and I are on vacation in Mexico. We both honestly are loving it here, and this situation really doesn't change that, but I am definitely reevaluating security. Now, my wife and I went out for dinner and walked back to our hotel. We get inside of our room, are settling things down, etc., and a few minutes go by, and there's a knock at the door. A man quietly says something in Spanish in an inflection that's trying to get our attention. Think room service or something like that. My wife looks at me like wondering who would be at the door at this time. At this point too, I should clarify that we did have the Do Not Disturb tag on the door. Anyway, a few seconds go by, and there's another knock at the door. My wife signals for me to go to the door, and so I go over. At this point, we've made no sounds for probably a minute before and during the knocks. Just as I reached the door, the keycard unlocked the door and it opened. A dirty-looking man had just opened the door and is now about 2 feet from my face. I put my hand on the door to prevent it opening any further. I think he was as surprised as I was, to be honest. He starts speaking Spanish and I hear the word Wi-Fi somewhere in all of that. I say, "No hablo español." In broken English, he tries to ask if the Wi-Fi is down. My wife says that it's not. I'm just kind of shell-shocked though by what had just happened, and keep my hand on the door as he talks and eventually leaves. I shut the door and engage the physical lock this time. I usually do this, but we had just walked in and wanted to get the stuff set down. I talk with my wife as we try to gather our thoughts about what the heck just happened. Essentially, a man knocked, got no reply, then let himself in and asks about Wi-Fi? No, this was clearly a burglary attempt, and he has a master keycard and thought that we weren't home. A minute or two later after this went down and we've collected ourselves and understood what had just occurred, I pass this information to the front desk in case this guy attempts other doors too. They seem to take it seriously, but no updates beyond that. The fact that this just happened has kind of blown my mind a bit, and I don't know if I've fully processed it just yet. Like, what if we were back 30 minutes later? We probably would have lost some stuff, right? 5 minutes later, we would walk into a guy in our hotel room. What if we went to bed earlier tonight? Could have been asleep and the AC is loud, and I don't know if I would have heard the door knocking through my sleep. If it was going to go down, then surely the way that it did was optimal. But those ifs are just crazy to think about. I'll definitely be storing our valuables in a safe now. I should have done this too, I know, but we just recently got here. But lesson learned. In the future, stuff is going immediately into the safe and lock is getting immediately engaged from now on. This is going to be a bit of a long one, so you'll have to bear with me here a little bit. So back in junior high, I started dating this guy. He's now my husband. But since we were so young, we had one of those classic on and off relationships all throughout high school. And during one of our off periods, I was going through some typical teenage girl drama and lost most of my friends. This was during COVID, and with nothing else to do, I got into gaming and ended up becoming close with a group of guys that I met online. They also went to my school. Now, I know what you're thinking. One of those girls who only hangs with guys because they're less drama and all that. No. If anything, guy friend groups are more drama when you're the only girl. Anyway, I developed a small crush on one of the guys. His name was Kyle. Not my usual type, but he was funny and easy to talk to, especially after a breakup. I told him that I wasn't ready to date again yet, but that I liked him and could see things going somewhere, eventually. He did not take that well. He kept rushing me, wanting to lock something down, and every time that I asked for space, he got mad. Like, blow up on me and kick me out of the group chat mad. He'd start fights, try to turn the others against me. Didn't really work, thankfully, and was constantly checking if I still liked him if I took too long to reply. Honestly, it was exhausting. Clingy is fine, but Manipulative clingy, not so much. Now, I had extracurriculars at the time, a life, and he acted like I owed him 24/7 attention. Despite all the drama, we kissed a couple of times, but we were never official. Eventually, too, I found out other guys in the group liked me too, and the whole situation just got really weird. So I ended up cutting ties with all of them in the end. Months later, I got back together with my now husband, and that really ticked Kyle off. He started posting music on SoundCloud and Spotify, basically painting me as the villain. Songs about how I led him on and how awful I was, etc. But I was happy, and so, in the end, I just ignored it. Now, fast forward to about a year after graduation. My now husband had just proposed, we were thrilled, posted the engagement photos, the whole thing. We got nearly 700 likes on Instagram as our whole high school anticipated this happening at some point. And coincidentally, almost the day after we post the photos, Kyle texts me, asking us if we want to meet up. So my husband says, why not? And we end up going to hang out with Kyle. I know, it was a really dumb idea, but since my husband was about to leave for the military, we figured that it couldn't hurt to reconnect with some people before everything changed, and try to mend some old bonds, I guess. Anyway, Kyle picks us up. He seems insanely excited to see us, which is really weird since we don't really talk and we didn't leave on a good note either. We drive to the mall, walk around, grab some food, pretty normal stuff. We caught up on the year since graduation, but even during that I could tell that something about him had shifted. His smile just didn't seem or feel real, I guess. His eyes were off, like he was looking through us almost. We get back in the car and start driving aimlessly through town. It's late, probably around 10 p.m, no traffic and everything's quiet. And then, all of a sudden, he just starts speeding. Like, not a fun little thrill. No, he's pushing 110 in a 30 zone, flying through red lights, swerving around corners like he's trying to get us killed. I half laughed at first, thinking he was just showing off, but he just kept doing it. He'd casually mention how the seatbelts in the car don't really work, and how he isn't a great driver. And then came the real red flags. He starts talking about how he thinks that he's not wired like other people, said that he doesn't really feel anything when people die. No sadness, no guilt, just nothing. He even said, I think I might be a little bit psychotic. My husband, trying to keep his cool, kind of shrugged it off with an awkward, well, that's not good. But I remember sitting there, heart pounding, suddenly hyper aware of the locked doors, the broken seatbelt, and how fast we were traveling. He then starts bringing up just how badly I had hurt him when we were 15 and that he never really mentally recovered from that. Obviously, I said sorry and that I was a stupid teenager, but I thought that we were past this, since we had both made mistakes. The whole car ride was, as you can imagine, crazy and just really off. He was blasting these songs that he had made about me. Weird lyrics, obsessive stuff. My husband and I exchanged a glance, but we let it go. And eventually he pulls into this massive park in the middle of town, the one with that huge new staircase that they built on the mountain. No one else is around and it is completely pitch black out here. He goes, "Do you guys want to go for a walk?" We get out immediately and we start walking because anything was better than being in that car again. The stairs go high, higher than they look from the road. I'm already uncomfortable, but I go anyway. About halfway up, my knee starts acting up a bit. It's an old basketball injury, but anyway, I tell them that I'm going to stay put because of this. Kyle stops too and starts talking again, this time about how he feels like he never really got closure, how he still dreams about me, how he's never been able to connect with anyone else the same way. He says this, mind you, while my fiancée is standing right there, and the tension is unbearable. My husband tries to keep things chill, even jokes slightly, but you can tell that he's ready to leave and is getting a little bit worked up now. Eventually, Kyle keeps going. He walks way ahead of us and then yells back, "You guys should come up here. It's crazy. Just look at this drop." We glance up, and he's standing at this unfinished part of the staircase, near a ledge with nothing but raw cement below. One wrong step and, well, that's it for you up there. My husband looks at me and then calls back, "No, we're good. We're gonna head back, okay?" Back in the car, it is tense. He's fidgety, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. He then breaks the silence by saying, "If I had a gun right now, I don't know what I'd do." Just like that too, calm, cold, no emotion in his voice. Hearing that, my body suddenly locked up. I didn't even know what to say. My husband leaned forward and asked if he was okay. Kyle just gave a weird little smirk and looked away. He said, "I'm good, just making conversation." We were utterly spooked, and kept mentioning that we were tired and ready to go home, but he just literally wouldn't take us. Finally, a cop car slowly rolls into the parking lot at some stage. Normal, right? We weren't doing anything wrong, but maybe Kyle was just unfiltered like how I knew him in high school, but Kyle loses it at this. Starts panicking, slamming the steering wheel, breathing quickly. He mutters, "If he pulls us over, just say that we were having a threesome or something." And I mean, what the heck, right? Well, we just sort of blink at him. I mean, that made no sense. We weren't high. We weren't drunk. We weren't even being loud. But he's acting like he's running from something. Or that something worse was going on. The cop doesn't stop us, just sort of passes us by. Kyle pulls out fast and then drives us straight home without another word. He doesn't even say goodbye when we get out. He just speeds off. Hey, was it just me, or did it feel like he was trying to kill us? I didn't even hesitate. "No," I said, "it wasn't just you." After that night, we didn't talk to Kyle again, like at all. But we both agreed that it was weird, too weird to ignore. My husband said that he just couldn't shake the feeling that we'd narrowly avoided something really awful. And honestly, I felt the same way. The way that Kyle stared from that ledge, blank, like he was watching and waiting for something to happen. The things that he was saying in the car driving so recklessly, how freaked out he got about the cop. Well, the next weekend we made plans to meet up with some more old friends, the guys in the initial friend group where Kyle and I met. Turns out, they had cut all ties with Kyle too. I hadn't realized just how serious it was, but there had been some drama because apparently Kyle had been dating a girl, her name was Sarah, who cheated on one of the guys in the group, and things got really messy. Sarah ended up getting pregnant, but wanted nothing to do with Kyle. Sarah claimed the baby wasn't even his. And now that the kid is born, it really does look like the guy she says is the father, but still. Heavy emotional stuff, right? And Kyle, well, he didn't seem to be coping. We told them about our strange night with him, about the car ride and all that, the creepy conversation, the ledge, the cops. They didn't even flinch. In fact, one of them actually said, "Yeah, that sounds like something that he'd do." Then they brushed it off, like jealous maybe, but harmless. That was what one of them said. Still, the more that we talked, the darker it seemed to get. They told us that when Kyle found out that I was engaged, that he went off the deep end. Full-on drinking rampage, punching holes in the walls, tried to fight another guy in the group who, by the way, is one of the gentlest people that you'll ever meet and is on the spectrum. Then, Kyle just sort of disappeared for a few days. Wouldn't answer texts, wouldn't call back. When he finally resurfaced, it was like nothing happened. Just showed up at their condo like he hadn't dropped off the grid after threatening one of their closest friends. Smiled, laughed, acted normal. No apologies and no explanation. Well, weeks go by and my husband ships out for training. I stay in town but move back with my parents to wrap things up before I move when he's done. My parents live about 30 minutes outside of town, and it's a very, very small community where they are. They have about 3 acres of land, and it's a dirt road leading only to their house. I always felt safe there, though, since we had cameras everywhere, and everyone in the community owns guns, including my dad. So, if someone was on the dirt road, my dad would sit on the porch with a gun, since we never had any uninvited visitors. But then, I start getting messages from Kyle. Said that he wanted to hang out one more time before my husband left for the military. I told him that we were busy, and he didn't respond after that. But then, weird stuff started happening. For instance, one night I swear that I saw his car drive by the dirt road in front of the house. This was insanely strange too because, like I said, we're pretty secluded here. Another time, I noticed a notification from a random burner account viewing my Instagram stories, always the first viewer, and every time that I blocked it, a new one would pop up. No posts, no followers, just watching. I tried to tell myself that it wasn't him, but I knew deep down that it was. I start getting messages from another burner account. They're not threatening exactly, but they're just off. Long rants about people being fake, how no one really understands loyalty, and cryptic comments like this. You're lucky, he's lucky. It could have been different, but I let it go. Let what go? I don't respond. He then tells me it's Kyle, by the way. I figure that he's just spiraling, maybe going through something, so I block the account and set mine to private. After that, I never did see him again in person. He just kind of disappeared after that. No mutual friends mentioned him, no posts, nothing. Honestly, it was almost like he just dropped off the earth. Well, 6 months later, I reunited with my husband and we moved several states away to a military base, and life finally felt calm again. But then, out of nowhere, we get a call from one of the guys from the old friend group. A bunch of them were still roommates, so they're all together when the call came in, and it started like this. Did you hear what happened? What, is everything okay? Kyle tried to break into Sarah's house. I just froze. Why? Why would he do that? Well, he claimed the baby is his, said that she'd been lying to him the whole time. According to them, Sarah said that he had showed up out of nowhere, managed to get inside, and at some point, while holding the baby, had tried to take her. In the chaos, she said that he had somehow stabbed her, and he was arrested not long after that. That's probably why no one heard from him, and why he vanished. But then, it gets worse. The guys told me that when he was arrested, they found a notebook, and that it had our names on every page, Sarah's and mine. Obsessive stuff. Pages and pages of graphic, violent fantasies about killing our significant others, about having his way with us in front of our husbands. And if he couldn't have us like that, he wrote that he'd end all of us together. It's been 3 years since then, and I still have nightmares about it all. I sometimes too dread that one day I'll have to explain the whole thing to my kids and tell them to be careful with their new high school flings, as it can either end like my husband and I, married together for 10 years, or like Kyle, still seeking revenge for a petty kiss and a crush 5 years later. I often think about that night on the staircase, about how he kept calling us to come up there, kept saying how crazy the drop was. What if we had gone? What if we hadn't have stopped halfway? What if I had never had that basketball injury, or my husband put his foot down? And what if that cop hadn't have shown up and spooked him just enough to, well, stop whatever he was trying to do that night? Maybe things would have ended up very differently. But they didn't. And honestly, I think that that's the only reason why I'm still here to even tell this story. The scariest part, for me at least, isn't what he did, but it's just how close we were to being the headline instead. Do you say data or data? Well, at my house, we say data. And for the longest time, I thought paying a fortune on my monthly data plan was just normal. That was, until I found out about Mint Mobile and their premium wireless plans that start at just $15 a month. I personally have saved over $100 by making the change to Mint Mobile, and was stoked that it was so easy to make the transition even with my existing phone. So, say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plan's jaw-dropping monthly bills and unexpected overages. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you. All plans come with high-speed data, or data, your choice, and unlimited talk and text, delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Ditch overpriced wireless and get 3 months of premium wireless service from Mint Mobile for $15 a month. No matter how you say it, don't overpay it. Shop data plans at mintmobile.com/bescared. That's mintmobile.com/bescared. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. I have so many encounters that I could share. I mean, I just seem to be a magnet for weird or creepy happenings, but this occurred when I was around 19 to 20 years old. Now, at this time, my life was a complete mess, to say the least, and I was under a lot of pressure. One of my favorite things to do was to go to a used bookstore that I've gone to since I was little, and you can exchange books there for some store credit, so I hadn't had to really pay for a book in years. This bookstore was in a strip mall, and there was a 7-Eleven where I would often get myself a soda and sometimes some cigarettes. The people at the bookstore didn't care if I had a drink in there or whatever, so I would often do that and just sort of browse around. Now, the men in there were probably in their 40s, and they were checking me out and making some comments. When I bought my cigarettes and the cashier saw that I was over 18, he said to me, "Wow, you're 20? I thought that you were so much younger. Doesn't she look younger?" And the other man working there agreed. It seemed like a bit of an odd thing to say, I guess, but anyway, I wanted to sit at the Starbucks across the street, but there was no seating. So I lit my cigarette at the 7-Eleven, and It turned out that the cashier decided to take his break and smoke at the time. I tried to be casual and not seem creeped out, but my guard was up, so I wandered over to the store to stay away from whatever that they were doing. I was in the bookstore for a while. Then somehow I lost track of where I parked. I swear that I could lose my car anywhere, but I was wandering around the parking lot and stepped between two trucks at one point. Randomly, the 7-Eleven worker stepped in front of me, saying that I had to come back in. I told him that I had to work in a pretty dismissive way and stepped forward. He repositioned himself so that I couldn't pass him without spilling my drink and walking under his arm. He claimed that the cashier really needed my number. He claimed that at 5 p.m. they were going to a party and I could come to the back of the store and drink until they left. It was around 4:30 at the time, I think. I told him that I needed to do work and again tried to move around him. He had taken a few steps forward, so I had less room, but I'm small and I tried backing up to go in between the other cars. After a couple of minutes of this, I decided to go inside the store because, at least it had cameras. I saw two cops walking out as the employee led me in. I wanted to stop them, but they were moving too fast for me to try and grab onto one of them or something. In hindsight, I know that I could have just yelled something, but I didn't think of it at the time. I also have notoriously bad luck with cops, so that just didn't feel like the safest option either. Anyway, when I came back in, they had already selected mini bottles of liquor for me. The cashier was explaining how this party on a Wednesday at 5 p.m. was going to be awesome and there would be substances and alcohol and I was going to have so much fun. I kind of aha'd and yeahed through that because I knew that there was no party. Finally, the cashier got around on what he wanted, which was basically demanding my number. The other employee moved to the door and the cashier was hounding me for my number. I decided that the best route was to use a number with a 555 in the middle, because apparently those are used for Hollywood phone numbers, but they tried to get me to the back, but I said that I had to work and I'd go to the next party with them. I was trying to placate them, but still just get out of there. Somehow, too, no one else was in this 7-Eleven, and basically I was fending off two creeps with nothing but a soda and a bag of books at this stage. I finally managed to appease them and exited, but knew that they would be watching me. I knew that I couldn't walk to my car and go off to Nanny because I didn't want them to see my car at this stage. So I walked as calmly as I could to another store and frantically called the dad of the kids that I was going to watch. At this point, I broke down and I was shaking and crying, and his wife was at work, so he was really my only hope to get out of there quickly. And he pulled up in front of the store and I jumped inside. I caught a glimpse of them looking out of the window, but I don't think that they saw me, to be honest. It wasn't until late that night that we went and we picked up my car. Friends who I have spoken to about this have different ideas of what they wanted. Whether it was trafficking, kidnapping, or just holding me in that gas station, I still don't completely know what it was, but those are for sure some of the options, and they definitely did not have good intentions. That much is clear. Looking back, I can laugh a little bit because as soon as the dad came, I noticed a hammer in his car and asked if he planned on attacking them for him to say, "You just never know when you might need a hammer." I'm thankful that he was there to help me. One day, some time ago, I went over to my aunt's house to sleep because, well, I had been out drinking all night and the night before as well. It was about 10 a.m. when I got there, and she had given me the okay to sleep in the basement. So I went down to lay down in her futon type of couch. I tossed and I turned for maybe about 20 minutes. I come to check the time, and it was suddenly 9 p.m. The basement had been very dim, just enough to make out figures of things in the basement because the light was on and it didn't really work too good. I laid there with my eyes closed, trying to fall back asleep, but I just couldn't sleep, so in the end I sat up and turned on her game that was on in the basement. Tried to play for maybe 10 minutes when I laid back down to try and get some more sleep. Same thing, tossed and turned for maybe another 10 to 20 minutes, then checked the time and it was suddenly 2 a.m. I then got up again and texted my cousin because he was supposed to pick me up. I got up to watch for him through the basement window. The window was about a half a foot or a foot higher than me. I jumped a couple of times to look out and suddenly I got an eerie feeling, so I grabbed a stool and I stand on it. Suddenly, after a couple of seconds of looking out the window, there was a hard scratching on the concrete wall just an inch or two from my ear. I slowly turned my head and nothing was there, so I decided to go to the other window on the other side of the basement. Usually my aunt's furnace made 2 banging sounds every 30 minutes or so I was okay hearing that, but after the 2 bangs, there were 4 fast bangs right after that. I looked towards the stairs on my way over, and I swear to you that something had peeked out its head from behind them. I told myself, that's okay, it's nothing I haven't experienced before. But then, as I got to the other side of the stairs, near the other window, I looked, and there was this 7 to 8 foot tall shadow-like figure standing there, just looking at me. Again, I told myself, as long as you're not scared, it won't bother you. So I went and stood looking at the window. Then, after I got down and I ran up the stairs and outside as fast as I could, into the street. Thankfully, my cousin had just started to pull up. I then began telling him what had happened as soon as I got in, and that is definitely the closest anything has gotten to me, other than my encounter with a little person, and I seriously believe that it was some kind of a demon that had evil intentions. I'm 22 now, but this happened when I was around 13 to 14 years old. So me and my mother were on a hike through Panther Creek Trail in northern Georgia. We hiked around 4 to 5 miles into the trail. Keep in mind that we had never hiked on an actual trail before, nor had we ever been to this trail or even familiar with this stretch of wilderness as we lived in metro Atlanta. But our goal was to reach a huge, beautiful waterfall at the end of this trail, Panther Creek Falls. Now, there was a couple in front of us pretty much the entire hike, around 2 to 3 hours or so. Once we reached around the 2/3 mark, the couple in front of us were talking with each other and said that it was getting late and that they should probably turn back before it got dark. One thing that I should note is that there are parts of the trail that are very tight trails on the sides of hills which had no guard fences or rails, and the trail had a 50 to a 150 foot drop into a creek at the bottom, lined with huge boulders. Notably, there was a part of the trail that you actually had to sort of shimmy across, as it was only maybe 8 to 9 inches wide and on a rock face to boot. But anyway, back to when the people were talking about turning back. So my mum heard them talking about it and told me the same thing, that we best turn back. Being a teen who thought that he was invincible, I convinced her that I could make my way to the falls quickly and turn back to meet up with her on the hike back to the parking lot. She argued, but eventually she let me go. After another hour or so of hiking, I made it to the falls and took some pictures as the light was fading. Nobody else was there at the base of the falls with me, and I noticed it really started to get dark quickly, and I started to get a little bit worried since I knew that it was going to be a couple of hours to get through the trail on the way back. After an hour of hiking, I was in complete darkness, with my only light being the one from my phone. I did bring a backpack with water, a knife, and some other little bits and bobs. It was a completely non-moonlight night, and the only way that I was going to navigate was by pointing my light at the ground to see the trail to keep on it. Now, at one point, I will admit that I started to get really scared by the noises of the animals and the forest sounds, so I decided to pull my knife out of my backpack. I held the knife the majority of the 3 to 4 miles until I got to the part where you have to sort of shimmy across, and so I had to put my phone light in my pocket so that I could have a hand free to grab the rock and shimmy across. As I did so, my knife unfortunately fell out of my hand, and it made no noise for over 10 seconds, then hitting a rock with a metallic sound way down. And I knew then that if I fell, I was done for. Luckily, I made it across and managed to get back onto the trail. Getting my bearings, I looked at my phone to try and get some service and call my mum or the police or something, as I felt like I was in an extreme sort of danger situation. I mean, I could barely see the trail at this stage. I looked though, and I saw my phone battery was on 3%. This being the only light source made me start to panic to the point of tearing up a bit. I continued on the trail with my battery slowly fading as I used the flashlight. As I was walking, the phone flashlight only lit up about 2 to 3 feet in front of me. I mean, it was pretty much pitch black at this stage, a darkness that I have never before or since experienced. Then, just as I was walking, out of the darkness in front of me, there was a man. He was walking toward me from the opposite side of the trail, from the direction that I was heading in. I literally jumped at the sight of him as it was so instant. And that's when I noticed. He had no flashlight, a small sport backpack, and an absolutely emotionless face, and dead eyes staring completely past me. When I saw him and he scared me, I immediately said, "Oh, hey, what's up, man? I'm trying to get out of here." He never said anything as he passed me. I looked back, expecting him to turn back and sort of talk to me, but he never did. In the moment, I thought that it was so strange, and then I thought about it and realized, how the heck is anyone supposed to navigate this trail and its many challenges at night in pitch black darkness with no flashlight? To this day, I still think that there was no way that anyone could navigate that trail at night with no light source, familiar or not. It was then, too, that I got a terrible gut feeling about him, and I started running off at the trail through the trees towards lights and the sounds of cars in the distance. After a couple of minutes, I finally found myself on the side of the highway, where I then used a little bit of my battery to call my mum, and she was crying and asking me where I was, and she ended up picking me up at the gas station 2 miles away from the trail entrance, running over my foot to boot as an accident in a moment of panic to get me in the car. I later told her the whole story, and since then we haven't hiked since. We're not good at it, have no experience, and quite honestly, this whole thing just scared both of us. I still don't know if the guy was a ghost, a person just trying to catch people on the trail and do things to them or something, or maybe just a figment of my imagination. But quite frankly, I didn't care to stick around long enough to find out. This happened on a quiet Saturday at Southwest Minnesota State University. The campus was practically empty. No classes, no students in the hallways, just silence. Now, I had 30 minutes before work on campus and didn't feel like walking all the way back to my dorm, so instead I decided to rest on a couch in one of the main buildings. I wasn't tired, not even sleepy. I just wanted to sit in peace before my shift started. So I got comfortable, closed my eyes for a moment, not asleep, just resting. And then, out of nowhere, I felt someone gently tap my shoulder. When I looked up, I was startled. I hadn't heard any footsteps, no sound at all, and yet there he was. A bald man that I didn't recognize at the time. He asked me, "Where's the social science building?" I thought that was a bit weird. Everyone on campus knows where that is, and it was only an 8-minute walk from where we were. I told him, though, that it's at the far end of the building, and he just nodded and walked away. But here is where things get a bit strange. So about a minute or two later, I suddenly found myself in the social science building on the upper level. I had no memory of walking there, though. No stairs, no connected hallways, just sort of a jump. One moment I was on the couch, the next upstairs in a building that I've been learning in for 3 years, and I couldn't even recognize it. I was disoriented, lost. Something felt off, like I was trapped in a place that I thought that I knew, but I couldn't find the way out, and I felt weird. I decided to go downstairs and to try and leave the building, and that was when I heard running from behind me, fast, heavy footsteps. I turned, and it was him, the bald professor, running directly toward me. Fear suddenly took over. I didn't wait. I bolted for the door and ran straight to the cafeteria, one of the few places on campus where people were actually found. When I looked at the time, only 12 minutes had passed, but what I experienced felt so much longer, like I had been gone or disconnected from time. Later, too, I found out something that made my skin crawl. That professor had been teaching in the social science building for 9 years. So, why did he ask me where it was? And that wasn't the only strange part. You see, in the week before this happened, that same professor had been coming to the campus where I worked. Not once or twice, but multiple times during every shift, buying things worth $1 or less. Just cheap little items, always while I was working, always watching and always present. At the time, I didn't think too much of it, but after the incident, it hit me. He had been watching me. After the day that he chased me in the building, though, I never did see him again. Not at the store, not at the campus, nothing. To this day, too, I still don't know what really happened. Maybe it was psychological, maybe spiritual, maybe something else entirely, but I do know this. That day I was pulled into something, like a trance-like state, a test, a glitch in reality, if you want to call it, and I thankfully made it out. Whatever was waiting at the end of that empty building, I don't think that I was supposed to reach it, and thankfully, I never will. To be completely honest with all of you guys, I'm still 50-50 on the ghosts or paranormal thing, but I do have a couple of experiences that I really cannot explain. One in particular has always frightened the heck out of me when I look back on it. So I live in Utah, and we have Mormon churches literally on every block and in every neighborhood. A lot of my friends growing up, and to this day are Mormon. I used to go to this thing called Young Men's, it's essentially Boy Scouts, with my best friend who lived directly next door. This was like a once or twice a week activity, and although I grew up in Salt Lake City, my family wasn't Mormon, but my friend was my best friend in the world, and we did everything together practically, and so I would tag along sometimes. It was just a rotation of weirdo Mormon adults who taught us stuff, and we'd do random activities. I believe I was 10 or 11 when I would go to these with him. Now, one time in particular, it was a big gathering of some of the families involved in that young men's group. Essentially, it was just a big barbecue on one side of the church. The event was mostly outside with some activities in the church. The other half was not in use, and it was pitch black over there. There were a lot of people, and the lines for the bathrooms were super long, so I venture over to the pitch black part of the church to use those bathrooms instead. I cannot remember exactly what time it was, but it was starting to get a little bit dark outside. That side of the church that I ventured over to was pretty much pitch black though. There was enough light outside at the glass doors that exit outside near the bathroom that I could just see enough to get to the bathroom, but that was about it. And it was now that I remember just getting this extremely eerie feeling in the bathroom while I was doing my business. I didn't think too much of it. I mean, I've always been a bit of an anxious person, and I'm pretty self-aware about that. After I use the bathroom, I exit and I go to use the drinking fountain right outside of it. As I bend down to take a drink, I then get this overwhelming feeling of terror and that something was wrong. I turn around and there's this pitch black hallway, and I see this little kid who is pale, has marks on him, and his clothes are dirty and tattered. I vividly remember that pale face with marks all over his body and tattered, dirty clothes. He walks up to me, starts almost giggling, and my first instinct was to ask, "Are you okay?" The kid looks at me again, giggles. He walks out of those glass doors leading outside. Those glass doors were leading into the opposite direction of where the party was, to another parking lot that didn't have any cars parked in it. I remember I was just sort of standing there in pure terror, and then I ran back to the party. I didn't say anything to anyone, but was just sort of looking for that kid almost frantically. I never saw him at the party. I remember just being sort of shaken to my core for the rest of the night, and that night I didn't sleep. I don't think that I told my friends or family about what I saw because I knew that they would think that I was just full of it. I really don't talk about it much at all, in fact, because if someone had told me that story, I probably wouldn't believe them either, and I would also say that they're full of it. I also don't expect anyone here to ever believe what I saw, and I don't ever even try to convince people, to be honest, because it was just such a weird experience, and I really don't know what to make of it. I guess I just wanted to share whatever weird thing or experience that was. That honestly still shakes me to my core when I think about it. I was around 9 or 10 years old when my mum and I moved up north to the southwest of the UK. We just settled into our new home, and I was starting in a new school as well. On my very first day, we had an assembly. For anyone not from the UK, that's a morning gathering where the entire school meets in the hall to hear announcements from the teachers and all that sort of stuff. Nothing exciting, just them going on about, to be honest, I cannot even remember, but just random stuff. Anyway, one detail that always stood out to me, even then, was how close the school was to a major naval base, which was just down the road at about maybe 500 meters away. This particular base, it houses nuclear submarines and large naval vessels too. At the time, I didn't think too much of it, but now it definitely feels like it might be relevant. So I've always struggled with paying attention due to my ADD, attention deficit disorder, so naturally, my mind began to wander a bit. While the head teacher droned on, I found myself gazing through the tall windows of the assembly hall. It was around 9 in the morning, and the sky was a blanket of heavy grey clouds that day. And then, something strange happened. As the cloud cover began to shift and thin out in patches, I spotted something in the sky. It didn't move with the clouds. It didn't shift, flicker, or pass like a plane might. It just sort of sat there, motionless, in the break between the clouds. A large triangular object, dark and metallic. It definitely wasn't a trick of the light or a fleeting shadow or anything too. This thing had shape, 3 distinct points, clean edges, and a presence that felt, well, strange. My first thought as a kid was that maybe it was some kind of satellite or weird military equipment, but it seemed far too low, far too clear to be that. It wasn't suspended in space, it felt like it was right there, hovering above us, completely still while the sky moved around it. I remember blurting out something like, "Is that normal?" right in the middle of the assembly. The kid next to me nudged me and whispered for me to be quiet and pay attention. But when I looked back up, the clouds, they had rolled back in, thick and unbroken, and whatever I had seen was gone, just like that. Mind you, I didn't see it fly away, I didn't see it vanish in a flash. It was simply there one moment and then it just wasn't. It stuck with me ever since then, and I remember this all so vividly. Not just the shape or the silence, but the feeling that I'd seen something that I wasn't supposed to. I know it's easy to chalk it up to a child's imagination too, and you know what? Maybe that's all it was. But back then, I didn't know anything about UFOs or strange sightings like this. I had no frame of reference. I was just a bored kid in an assembly looking up at the sky. But I saw something, and I still think about it. This begins back when I was 15. Just for some background too, I work in a 5-star Michelin restaurant as a waitress in a sweet little area. We usually don't get anyone with bad intentions, usually just snobs really. Anyway, Easter Sunday of 2022, one of the busiest days of the year for us, a man, who will be known as the Easter Man, came in looking for a table for one. He was in a 3-piece suit with a carton of chicken eggs. He was sat in my section, so I go over to get a drink and food order. Once I got his order, he kept me talking, asking about my education, what I was doing in school, what my plans for the future were, what my hobbies were, my name, etc., etc. Just a little too much to be polite, but I let it slide. I was busy and tired, and I didn't want any trouble. Eventually, he left for the day, and quite honestly, I thought that was that. Now, for the next couple of months, he would come in 2 to 3 days every week. He got more confident too, attempting to flirt with me, asking me to come out with him after work. However, things got worse when one shift, I was walking him to his table and he slid his hands down my back and over my butt. I turned around and somehow politely told him not to touch me and do not push my boundaries, as I was only 15 and he knew that. After that, I didn't serve him that day. A week later he came in and I refused to serve him once again. My manager took over his table, and yet when everybody was on break and it was only me on the floor, he came inside. He knew by that point that it was table service only, and came up behind me, bringing his hands down on my arms. I was shaken up by that, but politely again told him not to touch me. And then after that, I didn't hear from him again until next Easter of 2023. Now, last Easter, things got worse. He showed up again, the usual shenanigans, yet my managers were prepped this year, not allowing me to go within the vicinity of him and keeping me safe. But this was only useful inside of work. You see, I walk through the town centre to get to work. It's about a 25-minute walk from the train station, and as I was walking to work one day, he saw me in his car and followed me into work. I immediately told my managers, who, yet again, told me to stay away from him. A week after that, I was having coffee before work, about a 15-minute walk away from my job, and what do you know? Guess who sees me and follows me on foot to work? I again tell my managers, who keep me away from him, again mind you, yet that day was different. He asked my managers for me, saying that he knew that I was there because he'd seen me. Now, last year, in 2024, I took a lot of holidays around Easter time and was off for a lot of exams at that point. Supposedly, he came in a few times, asked for me, and he didn't come in much when I wasn't anywhere to be seen. He hasn't come in since then, however, and, well, this Sunday is Easter Sunday. So, wish me luck for Easter of 2025, because I dare say that I'm going to need it once again. This experience happened when I was 21, 5 years ago now. It's something that has played on my mind since, but I've never really talked about it. So, I went to dinner with a friend from university. Her name was Amy. We had one glass of red wine each with dinner, and I was staying at her house that night. So by the time that we got back, I was totally sober. Like I said, it was one glass of wine with dinner anyway. I never even felt tipsy. Amy was in her ensuite brushing her teeth at one stage, and I was laying in her double bed on my side, facing the bathroom that Amy was in, when all of a sudden I felt the very distinct feeling of a hand with long nails go down my back, from my neck to my bottom. It felt like a real hand as well. I could feel the long nails of all the fingers, and it tickled in the same way that a person's hand would. I spun around in shock and faced the other side of the bedroom, and for a split second, I saw a tall, middle-aged man facing me with his eyes boring into mine. It was the most uncomfortable, unnatural thing that I have ever felt. He was perfectly aligned with the far wall of the bedroom, and I saw him about 5 meters away, so no explanation for the human hand scratching down my back. I was suddenly crying and shouted for Amy, even though she was just next door, and I told her what happened. I was super emotional at this point, obviously. And then she started crying. I asked why, and she told me that she felt like somebody had been watching her from the corner of her room for months now. She even showed me text to her boyfriend where she had told him that she was struggling to sleep because she felt like she was just being watched all the time. Now, a well-known male serial killer, in London at least, that preyed on young women, used to live 2 doors down from Amy's house. I didn't know this as well until I looked it up afterward, trying to find information about this place. It's taken me years to process this because of just how real it was. I mean, I felt the hand scratch me. I saw the man right there, and this stuff is real. So I'm an EMT as of writing this, but as this takes place, I was a student doing an ambulance ride-out with the local fire department. We have an hourly minimum as students to go and learn with them and take calls and all that. Now, on my official last day of ride-outs, I chose a Friday night shift, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. I live in a busy-ish, smaller city in Texas, so most of our calls at this station would occur later into the night. And so, as you can probably imagine, it was common for us to sit around waiting for nighttime. Now, I was taking notes for class when we got dispatched to an unknown status female under a bridge. This isn't unusual, as we have a big homeless population and callers will see them on the road and think that something is wrong. Often they'll just be drunk, or sometimes we have to give them something if they have OD'd or whatever. I was pretty excited, not because of someone hurt obviously, but because of the adrenaline rush. Walking out onto the scene, we were dispatched to a residence. It wasn't a house, but it was more a collection of tents intricately connected together under a big main highway road. Walking closer, the EMT, medic, and I found who our patient was. Initially, she had her back turned toward us, and she was sitting down crisscross style, so we were unable to see what she was doing. But whatever she was doing, she looked very busy doing it, like she was soaring or doing something odd directly in front of her. She was sitting in a wet ditch, slightly away from her residence, and it smelled terrible, but I chalked it up to poor living conditions. We tried to get her to speak to us, and she cussed and shooed us away without turning around. Walking up, we finally realized what she had been doing. At first glance, I noticed her legs and feet. She had discolored ankles and feet in unnatural shades of purple, yellow, and green tones. Toward the toes, there was raw red flesh slowly bleeding and inflamed. I didn't recognize what she was holding at first, as I was too distracted by her feet. At this moment, my medic was talking to her, trying to comprehend what the heck was happening, and to get her to want transport, but she was trying to cut off her toes with a pair of kitchen scissors. She had completely degloved her toes, and we were also unable to find them on the scene. Now, despite the gruesome injury, she was not in pain, assumedly from the flesh necrotizing. She was also arguing my paramedic down, saying that she did not need to go to the hospital. It took about 30 minutes to get her to at least come inside the ambulance. Unfortunately, the medic and I, we were the unlucky ones to sit in the back with her while the EMT transported. Before transport, however, the smell was overwhelming, and my medic had to briefly step out and throw up before going en route. I'm still unsure why I didn't get sick. I mean, it was really bad. I do have a background in mortuary transport though, so a bonus from that job, I guess. With her on the stretcher and with better lighting, we were able to see the damage that she had done to her own feet. Now, the entire time she was arguing that she wouldn't need an amputation and that cutting her toes off and wrapping bandage around them to get rid of the gangrene would be enough. I looked at her injuries more closely and saw that there were bugs in her skin. Not big ones, but the movement was present, and that's how I noticed them. We didn't want to make her angrier than she was, so we didn't take any vitals or ask too many questions. The stench, though, was absolute insanity. Upon arrival to the hospital, an ED doctor that I'd seen a few times during clinicals took over. The patient was very excitingly screaming about her removal of her toes directly into the doctor's face. We sprayed everything and wiped literally every surface of that ambulance with disinfectant. Directly after that, we left and got some food from Zaxby's. Also, I will mention too that the patient had a bunch of racist tattoos on her, and the day before the fire department had been out on her for a similar call before she hacked off her toes. She had been screaming racist profanities, slurs at one of the responding EMSs, and she apparently had an entire handle of Tito's to drink. And while I don't think that this is the scariest thing to have happened to anyone, I was certainly very unnerved by the experience. Seeing as I'd only responded to car wrecks, DV, and medical issues so far, Something like this was definitely unexpected. Sometimes too, I'll just randomly have images of her feet pop into my mind, and that is something that is very hard to live with. So I'm 27 and my mum is 49. We don't live together, but we stay close by generally. Her name is Linda. Now, we used to live in a small town for years, and during that time, my mum would have many occurrences where people in public would recognize her. She's a door dasher, so it would happen often at restaurants, but also pretty much everywhere else as well. At gas stations, getting a fountain drink and gas, at a Walmart, even at the post office. Whatever this thing is, it always makes an impression where the people around her point out that it's her. They'll say things like, "Back again already, huh?" when going to get a drink at the convenience store, or, "Hey, I haven't seen you in a few weeks, how are you?" in a place that she's never been before. At the post office, the guy asked her if she was able to ship that package that she was having trouble with the other day. She hadn't been there in weeks. Sometimes they'll say things like, "Are you doing okay now? I hope your day is going better than it was earlier." At first you think that this was just coincidence, but it just happens way too often. My uncle and aunt had a sighting of the thing once. My uncle was talking to it and chatting up a storm, calling her by name and talking about the family. Apparently it just went along with it and chatted back, but my uncle nor my aunt is the type to lie about this stuff, so I really do believe them. After a while, my aunt came back up and asked my uncle who he was talking to, and he said, "I'm talking to Linda," in an obvious tone. My aunt said, "That's not Linda," and it just looked at her and then casually walked away. My aunt's description said that it looked like my mum, but not quite fully. Little features were off, and I know that it sounds cliche, but that's what she said. Just little features were off. Now, here's the weirdest part though. You could think that it was just someone in the town that looked like my mum, right? Well, we moved 9 hours away from that town recently, and after about 2 weeks, it's all started up again. Exact same thing. Random people referring to weird interactions towards my mum, acting like she was there earlier when she wasn't, talking about past conversations that they never even had. I have been present for some of these interactions too. One just happened today, in fact, which is why I thought that I should share this. Whatever it is, it seems to have followed her, and I don't know. What do you guys think that this is, and is there anything that we can do about it? In the summer of 2014, my then girlfriend and I got access to her brother's apartment. It was the year after we had both graduated, so we were still living at home with our parents. That's why we were excited to have a week with our own place where we could be alone. Her brother had warned us that the apartment was haunted, not something that we paid too much attention to. Neither of us particularly were interested in anything paranormal, and I think we mostly just sort of laughed it off as a bit of a joke. I mean, we were just happy to have somewhere to crash when we came home late from seeing friends without disturbing our parents for once. Now, on the very first evening, while lying on the couch watching a movie, we heard something fall to the floor in the kitchen. When we went to go and check, there was a plastic cup, one that had been on the counter, lying in the middle of the floor, as if someone had forcefully knocked it off. We hadn't even been in the kitchen that evening since we had eaten out, so we just left the cup where it was and we kept watching the movie. The next day we got ready for another summer day and left the apartment right after breakfast, and when we came back in the late afternoon or evening and walked into the kitchen, there was another item on the floor, this time a large plastic gym shaker. We picked up both objects this time. We didn't really talk much about it, just noted that it did happen and it was weird. But that night is when things got truly eerie. So we went to bed in the bedroom and made sure that everything was closed like we normally did. The apartment was on the ground floor, and there was a fair amount of visibility from the outside, so we drew the curtains and shut all the windows, partly to keep out the traffic noise and partly so that no one could see in. Of course, that made the room very warm, and in the middle of the night, my girlfriend woke me up. We were both lying on our backs in bed when she told me to look up, and the ceiling lamp, which hung from a long cord, was spinning rapidly, as if someone had given it a powerful push to make it rotate in a perfect circle. I was awake now, but very tired. I remember staring at the lamp until it stopped spinning and then just sort of falling back asleep. The next morning, she told me that she had stayed awake the entire night because she was so shaken by it. I remember her being pretty rattled the next day, but we moved on quickly and we never really talked about it again. Our relationship didn't last past the fall, and 8 years later, in a completely different city, we went home together after running into each other by chance during a night out. I asked her if she remembered the lamp in the bedroom that summer, and she immediately burst out yes, and that it honestly terrified her. It's something that I'll never forget, and something that to this day I still cannot explain. For many years I've been thinking about this, and I still don't know if it was just my childhood imagination. So I used to tell my friends that I saw something in my house. Usually I'd say that it might have been a ghost, but honestly I genuinely have no idea. I cannot say exactly how old I was, but I was definitely still in primary school. That much I remember. It happened in the winter, in Poland, 2009 most likely. Probably a few days after Christmas Eve, because I was playing with a Lego set that I got as a gift. Now, it was already dark outside, the lights were on in my room, and I was playing on the carpet across from the door that opened onto a lit hallway. From that angle looking out the door, I could see a wall and the banister around the space above the stairs. I was really focused on playing, my eyes were down, but for some reason, maybe because I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye, I looked up and glanced towards the door. That's when I saw it. From the left side of the doorframe, a figure slowly started to emerge. It must have been over 1 meter tall, but no taller than 1.5 meters. It had a strange color, but not so much the figure itself, more like an aura surrounding it. Kind of a mix between purple and celadon. It was floating in the air, maybe 0.5 meter off the ground, hard to say exactly. I was just a kid sitting on the floor after all, so I had to look up slightly. It had bent legs and a bit of a hunch, and in that position it slowly drifted to the right through the air. I don't remember what it was wearing exactly, but I know that it had clothes, purple for sure, pants and black leather shoes. It looked like a formal outfit almost, and it appeared to be male. I remember that it had a fairly large head, so big it looked disproportionate to the rest of its body, with a black mop of hair and big ears. The facial features were hard to tell. I saw it from the profile. Definitely very prominent cheekbones though, and a big nose. I froze for about 3 seconds though. I couldn't move. I was in shock. Then a wave of chills hit me and fear took over. I immediately looked down at the Lego bricks and started pretending to play. In my head I was thinking, just pretend you're playing and maybe it won't notice you. Pretend that you didn't see it. But after a few seconds, I couldn't process what I had just seen, or even whether I had seen something, or if it was just my imagination. And quite honestly, I might have believed it was all in my head to this day, if not for what happened next. Curiosity won out and I looked up again, without lifting my head too much because I was afraid that it might still be there. And then, I saw from that side of the doorframe, part of the figure was still visible. After a short moment, it then completely moved out of view. I was stunned and terrified. I sat there for a while, trying to gather the courage to run to my parents, who were in the living room downstairs. When I finally managed to do it, I ran out of that room not looking to the right out of fear that it was still there, bolted down the stairs, and sat on the couch next to my parents. I never said a word to them. I just took comfort in the feeling of safety, and I was scared that they wouldn't take me seriously. I didn't have the strength to try and explain to them because the emotions that I had just gone through had completely drained me. That thing, whatever it was, it never even looked at me though. It was like it didn't even know that I had seen it. I never told any of my friends at school either, as I didn't want to be laughed at. For the next few days, I felt uneasy any time I played in that room though, afraid that I'd see it again. It took years before I told anyone, usually after a few drinks, and only in vague terms, just saying that I'd seen something that I couldn't explain, without ever going into detail, as I didn't want to seem like a complete weirdo. But that's why I'm here. Has anyone else ever encountered something like this? Was it just my imagination, do you think? What keeps bothering me though is that when I looked again it was still there. If it weren't for that second glance, I wouldn't even think twice about this, and would have assumed that it was just my imagination. But because of that second glance, I really don't think it was. This happened when I was a kid. My parents and I had moved to this apartment complex back in 1986 that was built in the 40s during World War II. The basement had a fallout shelter installed, and in the fallout shelter, there were gas masks, tins of old food, old World War II posters of enlisting. I was about 2 years old at the time that we moved in, so I didn't really understand or comprehend all of this, but I didn't start to have experiences until I was about maybe 5 years old. Some experiences involved my toys going on by themselves, dolls in spots that I didn't leave them, my radio turning off and on, to which my parents' explanation was that I was doing it, but didn't remember, or that it was just my imagination. But that all changed one night. Now, I had 2 windows on the side of my bed. This is relevant too. The right one would open and stay open with no problem, but the left one was always broken and a bit weird. It just wouldn't stay open, and we would have to stick a board in the window for it to remain open. Now, one night I had woken up to this loud bang which scared me half to death, causing me to sit straight up in bed. As I'm sitting there, my eyes trying to adjust to the room, looking around to see if something may have fallen, and if so, where. That's when I heard it again, another huge bang. It was on the side of me, so I look over in the direction to see what it could have been, but didn't see anything that could have made that noise. That is, until I see the left window, the window that needs a board to stay open, slowly opening up, and opening by itself. I sat there frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, if I was actually seeing what I was seeing. I couldn't do anything but sit there in disbelief and attempt to close my eyes tightly for 10 seconds because 5-year-old me, this was just a bad dream, and closing my eyes tightly is what I would always do to end a bad dream. I still do this to this day, to be honest. As soon as my eyes opened, I see the window fully open and then slam again. I realized at that moment that I was fully awake, and then the window starts to open again. Only this time it's opening a little faster than last time. And same as last time, it would open all the way and then slam shut. It happened again and again and again, each time opening a little faster than the last time and slamming shut. It was as if someone was opening it fully and letting it go in order to slam shut. But then the window flies all the way up and stays open. Then I hear the most horrible, evil, sadistic laugh, like a cackle right in front of me. Well, that was enough for me to finally move. I fly off the bed, getting tangled in my sheets and comforter. I managed to get the comforter off of me, but I still have the sheets wrapped around me. But that didn't stop me from hauling butt all the way to my parents' bedroom, screaming bloody murder as I did. My screaming ended up waking up my parents, so they were already awake when I got to their bedroom. I'm trying to explain to them what had just happened, what I had seen, and told them about the cackling and all that. My mother was the comforting parent and was trying to calm me down as best as she could, telling me that I just had a really bad nightmare and that my nightmare continued when I was semi-awake because I was half asleep awake. I was persistent though, and kept repeating myself over and over and over, telling them about the window opening and shutting by itself, and the cackling again and again. My father, who was the no-nonsense parent, was extremely upset that I had woken him up, and said, "Enough, it was just a bad dream. Come on, I'll show you. There's nothing in your room to be afraid of, and your mother's right. We probably just dreamed the whole thing. So come on, let's go." My father and I head back to my bedroom. My little hand clenching his hand tightly, we go into my room. My comforter is still on the floor. My father goes to pick it up, and when he does, he glances over at the windows and sees that the left window is still open, wide open in fact. Nothing in it to hold it, just wide open, which, knowing this window, should be completely impossible. My father goes over to the window, looks at it, then back at me and says, "Did you open this?" I tell him, desperately trying to get him to believe me, "No, Dad, I told you. It kept opening and slamming by itself." My father, frustrated, cranky, and highly annoyed at this point, tells me windows don't open by themselves. It probably got stuck when you opened it. My father reaches over to make sure that I didn't stick anything in the window to keep it open, and as soon as he stuck his hand in and was about to pull his hand away, the window slammed shut, nicking his hand in the process from pulling it out of the window. My father, who was still trying to make sense of this situation, was suddenly spooked and creeped out. I then spent the night in my parents' room in my sleeping bag on their bedroom floor that night. After that night, the activity seemed to amplify. Other stories for another time. It's been almost 40 years and I still have nightmares about that night. The window opening and shutting, the cackling, the fear, and my little 5-year-old heart pounding in my chest. It is hands down one of the worst experiences that I've ever had. Until I encountered the Hat Man, that is. Which, again, is another story for another time. In 2008, I was a sophomore in high school. The first day of school, I was sitting in my English class when this kid, whom I had never seen before, entered the class 10 minutes late. His name was Mike. The teacher asked why he was late, and Mike responded with, "Sorry, teach, I spilled strawberry daiquiri all over my shirt and had to change it." Mike was a bit of a class clown who was more trouble than funny, to be honest. He was the type of guy who believed he could do whatever he wanted and there would be no repercussions. For example, one day in English, the teacher was late getting to class, and while Mike said that since the teacher was 10 minutes late, legally we were allowed to leave, and so he did so. Later, he was shocked when he ended up in detention after school for skipping class. But Mike and his friends were the group that would sit in the parking lot at lunch and rev the engines of their Subarus and act like they were in Tokyo Drift or something. I remember that Mike played football that year and was livid that the coach didn't make him the starting quarterback, despite him not being all that impressive as an athlete. However, the thing that I remember the most about Mike was that he always wore this white baseball cap backwards and turned to the side, which was the style at that time. Well, the next year, my junior year, Mike just never showed up to school. Word was that he had been drinking with a group of friends near a fishing spot by the local river when he just disappeared. The rumors also started, and one was that he got into a fight with another guy who hit him in the head with a beer bottle. According to the rumor, Mike fell into the river and was swept away. Other people said that it was his brother who had pushed him into the river. One guy in particular claimed that he had hit Mike and pushed him into the river. Regardless of the truth, Mike was never found. He had a full-page memorial in the yearbook and everything. After that year, though, nobody ever really mentioned Mike again. As time went by, the only time that he would be mentioned were when some friends and I would meet up and somebody would say, "Who was that kid who disappeared again?" And the story would be told. Almost 15 years after Mike went missing, though, I met a guy who was a retired detective for the sheriff's department. His name was Jim. Well, it turns out that Jim was the one that investigated Mike's disappearance. When I mentioned the rumors about him getting hit with a beer bottle, he said, "Yeah, we heard those rumors too, but they just never panned out." Jim told me that the day that Mike went missing, he was out by the fishing spot with anywhere between 5 to 10 other teenagers. Mike had paid a homeless guy to buy a beer from the local store, so he and his friends could party out there. Afterwards, they drove way out to the fishing spot, 30 to 40 miles out of town. And Jim said that, more than likely, Mike was drunk and fell into the river and just was swept away. They never did find the body, which Jim said was probably in the Gulf of Mexico by now. Jim asked what kind of student Mike was in school. I told Jim that I thought Mike was an entitled class clown, to be honest. Jim wasn't surprised. Everybody else told him what a great student that he was, which he said isn't surprising with missing persons cases. Jim said that nobody wants to be the person who spoke poorly of the guy. He also said that he got the same feeling about Mike's parents. Dad came across as a bully who peaked in school, and Mum was the homecoming queen sort of deal. People who just never really moved on past that point, I guess. People who may have encouraged Mike's behavior, telling him about all the fun that they had had in their high school days. Well, a year or so later, I was out fishing by that spot at some point. I had gotten there late in the afternoon, and by the time that I was ready to leave, the sun had already gone down behind the hills. It was light enough that you could still see, but dark enough that you need your headlights when driving for sure. As I walked back to my truck, I noticed that I was the only one in the parking area, so I put my fishing gear in the bed and climbed into the driver's seat. As I backed my truck up, the headlights illuminated a cluster of trees in front of me. And that was when I saw the white hat against the dark backdrop of the woods. Thinking that somebody may have just left a lost hat hanging in the trees, which is common practice for lost gear, I flipped on my high beams to see if anything else was in the trees. And when I did, standing in the trees was a person that I recognized but couldn't place immediately. The figure was wearing the white hat and staring at me. After a few seconds of staring at him, trying to place where I knew this guy from, it clicked. It was Mike. He looked exactly the same that he did as that day that he claimed to have spilled his cocktail on his shirt. Almost immediately I realized who I was looking at. Mike then turned and walked into the forest. I then put my truck into gear and I noped out of there as fast as I could. I also haven't been back to that fishing spot since then, and I definitely do not plan on going back after sundown. I eventually asked a couple of guys that I know who fish out there if they've ever seen anything strange out there, but nobody ever had. I really don't know if I saw Mike because I knew him or if there was another reason, but I will never forget that white hat that he would wear all the time. This happened around November of 2021 in Garner, North Carolina. North Carolina, being how it is when it comes to weather, it was a fairly warm night this night. I went to the neighborhood soccer field to go stargazing and to look at the full moon. The sky was clear and the moon was bright. It lit the field up nicely, in fact. After I set up my telescope, 20 minutes passed by with my back turned towards the neighborhood. I see a light dance to my left, so I turn around. A guard is doing their routine patrol and checking for intruders, so I think nothing of it and I turn my attention back to the stars. Then, I heard a noise that didn't sound human or like an animal. A deep guttural sound came from far behind me and I turned to look again. It was the guard. It didn't feel right at all and I turned back to start picking my stuff up. Then I hear footsteps getting closer, and the light was gone. "What a wonderful night, isn't it?" the voice asked. I turned to respond, but I noticed something off. The figure stood straight, like a soldier in the military, feet together and arms to his side. Yeah, it is," was all that I could muster out, and continued gathering my telescope and bag. "What's your name?" the guard asked. The way that he asked was unsettling. It sounded sort of layered, I guess, as if there was another voice speaking along with his, curious yet menacing. My name's Jackson," was all I responded with, giving a fake name. I turned to face him and then I noticed why it seemed off. The figure was wearing a guard's uniform, but it looked worn and tattered. Its skin was black as a void, and I tried to look at its face with the moonlight, but there was nothing but a smile, a big menacing smile. "Nice to meet you, Jackson. My name's Mike," he said as he tilted his head to the side, revealing that there were no other features but that insidious smile. I began walking towards the neighborhood, but when I walked past him, my spine felt like it was turning into ice all of a sudden. And what followed made me terrified. It was the smell of sulfur. "Have a wonderful night, Jackson," was the last thing that I heard, and the act was slipping. The voice sounded inhuman, and even though I gave him a fake name, it made it worse. I walked far enough away to where I could still see the field and have a good distance away to see if he would return out from there, but he never did. So, a few months later, it was February, I was on a nightly walk and I stopped by the neighborhood office to visit the cat that resided there. While I was petting and playing with the little guy, a night guard stopped by to check on me to see if I was alright. I told him that I was and that I was visiting as the cat was in my lap, and before he walked away, I asked him if there was anyone named Mike that worked there back in November. He asked why, and I explained what had happened around that time, and then he promptly went to go and find me an answer. After a few more minutes, he came back out and looked confused. There was no one named Mike that worked there around that time in November, and he looked just as confused as I did, and maybe a bit more horrified considering that That was apparently his next area to check. We talked a bit more about how we both didn't like to mess with the paranormal, witchcraft, anything of the sort, and we parted ways, leaving me more unnerved than I was prior. To this day, that night still freaks me out, sending bad chills down my spine whenever I remember the disturbing and sinister smile that pierced through that void that was its face. When I was little, my parents bought the house that belonged to my dad's grandparents. I'm not sure how long the home was in my family, but I do know that my grandma lived there as a little girl. Now, when I was little, tiny in fact, I slept over my aunt's house for the night and my brother went to his uncle's house. The only people in the house were my mum and dad. My mum tells me that they were in their room at night next to a door that had a staircase that went to a bedroom upstairs. They said that they heard my voice calling Mum over and over again, upstairs and then on the staircase. They both recall the same thing, hearing my voice. I wasn't home though, so they went outside the house and looked for neighboring kids, but it was night and no one was outside. The family next to us was from a different country and did not call their mother traditional mum as well, and they knew that. Eventually I grew up a bit and I was going through puberty in this house, so I was already losing my mind as a kid, but I recall some very concerning moments in my young life there. I lived upstairs in that room and I was going through it as one does, but I was only about 9 and thought about putting something on my neck and floating, if you catch what I mean. And I tried, but luckily I was immature and didn't succeed. The upstairs had a staircase and it was open with white wooden balcony around it so you could look down. And that room, it still gives me the creeps. When I was younger, my aunt's boyfriend's brother died on train tracks a couple of miles from the house, and you could hear that train come through at night. At the night of, I slept in the living room and woke up at dawn standing on my tippy toes looking at a window that was next to the fireplace at the sky. At this time of the morning, the sun was coming up and there were stars out. I could hear the train, and when I woke up later, my mum had told us that he had died. I think about this a lot. On another occasion, I was in my upstairs room and we had it split down the middle. My sister's crib was by the stairs and I was on the other side of the room. We split it off by her closet and my little couch that I got from a garage sale. You couldn't see the closet doors from my bed, just the back of it. I was texting on my little flip phone and a towel flew and hit the wall. I was so scared that I couldn't move. I refused to be in that room anymore after that too. I decided to move into the basement of the house when I was in 6th grade. I had a folding cot, an old TV. It was going to be my space. I suffered from sleep paralysis pretty much every single night and I felt watched, uneasy and sick down there. My mum told me that my grandpa built the basement out. I'm not too sure about the basement, but it was not a good place to be, I'll tell you that much. But we all heard footsteps down there, multiple times, shutting doors, running in the basement. Unfortunately, that was the most scary, but before we moved out, I took a school photo of myself and hid it in the baseboards of the stairs of the scary upstairs room. I doubt it's still there, but I heard the new owners gutted it years ago and Gray flipped it. But here's my dilemma. I've been having nightmares about this house ever since we moved out years and years ago. We moved out before I went to middle school. I'm in my 30s now. It's been a hot minute since I've been at that house, but my dreams are always supernatural, about me in the house as an adult. The most recent dream was about a demonic spirit telling me that I needed to paint a picture of a window with green ivy around it. The upstairs room's window next to my bed, the wall outside was covered in ivy. It completely took the house on that side too. And it also told me that I needed to paint myself at the window. I told my husband this, and he said absolutely not, that it sounds like a trap and some conjuring stuff. I agree, but I really feel like I should paint it, and I'm not sure why I feel so inclined to do it. The house has been haunting me ever since, and we've all had supernatural experiences there, even my grandma as a little girl. So there's this one time that I was playing with my toys in the basement of my parents' house. I was around 6 years old, so it must have happened in 2011. For context, at this time, the house was not fenced, and it happened a few times that people just walked through my garden to access the field behind my house, so it could seem not unusual, but wait for it. After eating dinner, my parents would let me play with my toys for a little while since it was the Halloween vacation at that point. I can't say for sure what time it was, but it was definitely after 7 p.m. because I remember that it was already very dark outside. While I was playing, I heard a noise coming from, I thought at the time, the boiler room that is behind me. It usually makes noises, so I continued playing without even thinking about it. The door of the boiler room was closed like always. It's always closed because otherwise we can smell the fuel in the whole house. Anyway, I continued serving plastic food to my non-existent clients in my non-existent restaurant. Then I heard another noise. That time I turned around to see what made that noise and where it came from, but nothing. The door of the boiler room was closed like it was supposed to be. I was confused, but didn't worry more than that and continued playing. Until I heard a knock coming from the window facing me. I looked up and there was a man standing there looking at me. The guy had his head between the bars of the window, and still today I could recognize him, even if it did happen 15 years ago. He was wearing his 90s Nike jacket and a faded blue cap. He had a beard of 2 days, and he looked like he was very tired. I remember him having these massive dark circles under his eyes, his expression being neutral when I noticed him. After a few seconds of staring in shock, I ran upstairs to my parents, telling them about what I had just saw. My dad immediately ran down to the basement. He grabbed a hammer and got out ready to attack the guy if needed, but by then, the guy had just disappeared into the darkness. My dad even went to drive around the village that I live in to look for him, but we never did see him again. We believe that he probably ran through the field behind my house. These events, though, honestly traumatized me at that age. I was having a lot of nightmares, dreaming of this almost every night for a while. I had night terrors because of this, and still today I'm pretty terrified when I'm in this basement. It always just gives me the chills and makes me want to run upstairs as quickly as I can. So early this summer, I, male 16, got my driving license for a 50cc moped, common and popular thing here in Europe. And I was really hyped to finally get to ride with my friends and explore places that I couldn't have explored before without my moped. And everything went great for the first couple of days. Until one day, me and my friends were just out cruising and having fun. It was a warm and sunny summer evening, so we decided to go ride on some smaller gravel roads on the countryside. We did that, and we were riding there for maybe, an hour, until everyone had to get home but me. It was probably like 1 or 2 in the morning at that point, but I still decided to stay there and just ride around and listen to some music in my headphones. I started riding towards this one small village, surrounded by fields, and there was a lot of farms there too. I rode a bit slower there than usual so there wouldn't be any accidents with all the tractors and farm vehicles. But after I got through the village and closer to a bigger road, the sun was almost gone and it was getting really dark outside. It had been a nice ride, and I decided to start heading home on this almost empty highway, even though the speed limit was like 100 kilometers an hour, and it's not allowed to ride a 50cc moped on the highways. But I did it anyway, as there was really no one around. Home was almost 30 kilometers away from where I was at that point, so I was just going full speed in case to get home before my parents found out that I'd been outside until 3 in the morning. But when I'd been riding for like 15 minutes, I saw a car stopped on the side of the road with its lights on, and it had me a little bit creeped out, to be honest. I just pushed it out of my mind though and kept going, since I was almost halfway home anyway. But after a few minutes, I noticed the car from earlier speeding up after me, and since I have a moped that only goes like max 80 kilometers an hour, the car caught up to me pretty quickly. And then the car started to pass me, and when it got beside me, I looked in there and I saw a man, but he was covered in blood, and he was looking straight at me with the crazy eyes, if you get what I mean. He was smiling at me, so I got very scared, and he rode alongside me for probably a minute, but man, it felt a lot longer than that, with him just staring at me and looking at the road every once in a while. Then the man raised his other hand, waved me goodbye before putting his finger on his lips and doing the shush thing. After that, he sped off and got off of the highway onto a ramp to a smaller road, and when he did that, I saw that the car didn't even have a license plate. That was a super creepy experience, and I don't know why the man was covered in blood and why he had been parked on the side of an empty road at 3 in the morning. But what I do know for sure is that he's definitely not somebody that I would hope to ever meet again. I would really like to try and find an explanation for these events that happened to me while I was younger. It still sticks in my head to this day and makes me feel anxious for some reason. So while I lived with my mother, she said that she had experienced quite strange things happening in our house, from the kettle turning on randomly, even whenever we got a new kettle, to her just feeling uncomfortable during the night. When I got to about 10, I believe, one night I got up to use the toilet, and I remember seeing a man standing in our hallway, which really scared me. I ended up screaming for my mum to help after running back to my bed. I remember telling her what I saw and her actually believing me, which I think helped me cope a bit. Another time, which this one still scares me the most, it was around the time I was 14. I was in the same house, and it must have been about 6 in the morning. I woke up to a strange feeling, like somebody was watching me from next to my bed. The way my back was facing, I couldn't see though. I slowly turned to see a shadow silhouette standing right next to me, faceless. I didn't make a noise or anything, but I punched where the silhouette was, and then when I released, I just sort of laid back down straight away in a fetal position, because a very strong feeling of like fear and anxiety washed over me. I couldn't move, as I thought that it would do something to me. I stayed there like that for about 20 minutes and slowly turned to find it not there anymore. After I moved into my grandparents' house at about 15, I started to feel the same feelings I felt at my mum's about 2 months in. And one night, I heard what sounded like bare feet running to and from my bedroom door to the back outside door. It was a wooden floor and it was quick, like it was running, and then it would just sort of stop dead right outside of my door. Then it would wait for a few seconds and start running again. I texted my grandma asking if she or my grandfather were walking around. Luckily, she normally wakes up to text, so she replied no, and I then said, could you please come down the stairs with our dog and turn the lights on? As soon as she walked out with the dog though, I could hear my dog barking and then my grandma walking up to the door. and these were completely different footsteps. Weird stuff would happen all the time too, and I always felt like something was watching me. I invited my girlfriend over one time when me and her were like 16, and she stayed the night with me. At about 1, I could hear the footsteps again, so I woke her up and said, "Can you hear that?" Without saying anything, she listened, and then nodded at me yes. We did the same thing and texted my grandma, asking if she was moving about the house, and she said no again. But this time, I got the courage to swing open the door. I guess I was trying to act tough in front of the missus, but when I did this, there was nothing but a cold feeling of like dread. There are 2 more times I had experienced something. One time I was having strange dreams of being tickled in my sleep. I woke up to still be feeling this feeling and started freaking out as I'm awake and feeling somebody tickling my body. I leaned over my bed, not sure why, but I looked at the floor in the pitch dark, when out of nowhere, this strange blast of air, which felt like when you sort of stick your head out the car window at a high speed and you can't hear, hits me in the face. Obviously, I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. The last incident happened, though, when I came back from living in Scotland. Interestingly, too, in Scotland, I had no issues at all. Anyway, I had pulled up to my grandparents' house with my ex-girlfriend, and we were just having a chat in my car. I look in the front window of my grandparents' house, and I see the same shadow silhouette that I saw all those years ago. Once I get into the house after coming in through the back door, I can hear the radio switch on up in the front room. My pop turns it off and says I haven't heard it turn itself on ever before. And really, that's about it. It's been helpful to share this to just get it off my chest, but if you have any answers, I would definitely love to hear them for closure. I have to try and stop thinking about these events that happened to me because they just make me feel a bit crazy and stupid, but anyway, if you have any information about what any of this could have been, then please do share it. My neighbor Tom rents his home and he doesn't seem to work. He just sort of sits on his porch smoking pot most days. We've always kept to ourselves, but when I moved in 3 years ago, he introduced me to his wife, Susie. She didn't say anything and quickly just went back inside. After that, I only ever saw different women coming and going, so I figured Susie was either made up or not really his wife since I never saw her again. But today, for the first time in 3 years, I saw Susie outside. She looked like she hadn't seen sunlight in years. Pale, mentally unwell, and staring at the ground. She might even be disabled, I'm not sure. As I pulled into my driveway, Tom quickly rushed her back inside though. And now I'm really concerned that she's been kept inside all this time. Am I overreacting, or is this something that I should be worried about? Also, Tom has several vehicles, but only one is ever at the house at a time. A beat-up red Tahoe, a nice truck, a van, and a new silver Tahoe. It changes depending on the day or the week which one he's driving. But I've always found it odd, especially since it seems like he doesn't work, and I initially wondered why Susie never had a vehicle. Anyway, based on some feedback that I got, I decided to call for a wellness check for tomorrow on my way out of town. I've also since investigated a bit more and looked up the license plates on 2 of the 4 vehicles that he rotates out, and neither match the vehicles that they're on. I've spoken with a police officer who's a friend of a friend, and I shared all the details in the background. He's thinking that it will be best to have a cop pull Tom for the license plate the next time that he leaves the neighborhood, and while they're dealing with the mismatched plates, another officer will go to the house to perform a welfare check. I'm now waiting on an official callback to confirm all and take my statements on record. And I'll keep you guys posted about that for sure. But this whole situation, something just doesn't feel right. Me and my best friend at the time, we came from some pretty abusive home lives. As such, we often sought refuge in the woods near our neighborhood. We did this because during the day, we would be free of our abusers and adults brushed this off as kids being kids. But on a particularly bad night, my drunk father invited his motorcycle gang over, who were all terrible drunks themselves. They kept coming into my room trying to find me, but I hid away in my hamper, buried under my dirty clothes until they seemed to have given up or gotten too drunk to care. And quietly, after about an hour, I came out of the hamper and snuck out of my back window. We lived in a slab ranch style house, and my back window went into our backyard, which was unlit and sealed with the exception of a small gate that was blocked by their bikes. I snuck over to the back fence, picked a corner, and climbed over it, tossing myself to the other side. The neighbor behind us watched me cut through his backyard, as he had many times, and let me be. We lived in a village, so everybody sort of knew about my dad, but would never do anything about it. Anyway, I ran to my best friend's house, a mere 2 blocks away. But when I arrived and tapped on her window, her own abusive parents were asleep. Since I couldn't come in and she didn't want me to be outside alone, she climbed out of her window and the 2 of us walked to the woods. We settled next to a water reservoir meant to store rainwater in case of flooding, and we sat on the hill far from the road's view. She pulled out some snacks that she had brought with her, and we began conversing as 2 teenagers do about this and that. It was about 20 minutes later or so that we heard shuffling from inside of the reservoir. At first, we thought maybe a deer had jumped the chain link fence. Rare, but possible. So we just sort of tried to ignore it. But then it got louder. It was also unusual movement, like a dragging almost, or a scraping sound against the brush. Though these woods were usually empty, especially near the reservoir where we were, save for typical animals, we became concerned that maybe there was another human around out to spook us, or worse. We slowly gathered up our snacks and we moved on from sitting to a sort of crouched position. Once we stood up, we could see, though, what looked like a woman laying against the side of the reservoir's wall, which had a steep incline made of brush and thin twiggy sort of trees. My friend and I became a little bit concerned at that. The state of her clothes, a light-colored dress, had tears and dirt everywhere. She herself looked absolutely soaked, despite it not having rained in months, which is typical for mid-November in my state. Are you okay?" my friend asked in her direction. "Do you need help?" I asked after a little bit of silence. Nothing. The woman didn't move, didn't say anything, and for a moment, we didn't know what to do. It honestly looked like she needed help, so we didn't want to just leave, but, who would we go to? Would she be here if we found help and came back anyway? My best friend and I began to whisper possible options to each other when the shuffling crawl resumed. We turned and looked at the woman's direction, but she wasn't crawling anymore. Instead, she was now sprinting towards us. She was going fast enough that the long disheveled hair that had been obscuring her face moved behind her, and her dark, swollen face was now visible. She had blue lips, white, milky eyes, and began to screech all of a sudden. My best friend and I absolutely booked it. We ran as fast as we could to the streetlights and their orange glow, and we could hear her until we crossed the street, and then just silence. We turned back and looked at the fencing, huffing and puffing, looking for any signs of her. We saw nothing, though. and began to talk about how it was probably a senior teen messing with us or something. But then we saw her again, standing inside the fence, just staring at us. The orange glow of the lights hit her, making her features seem soft, if not still unsettling. I took a step in her direction, believing now that she was probably just some sort of crazy homeless woman. She was behind the fence, and the time that it would take her to climb it made me confident. I spoke to her. I told her that she was a creep for scaring us like that, and that it wasn't our fault that she was homeless. I did the front-end motion with my shoulders, if you know, you know, and shouted for her to not be so reckless and mean. This must have made her angry too, as a part of me knew that it probably would have, but she started to rush the fence again. It was a tall fence, so I knew that we could duck through some yards to safety before she hit the ground on the other side. I watched her, though, daring her, but she got to the fence and didn't climb it. Instead, she moved through the chain-link fence as if it wasn't even there. At that, my best friend grabbed me and we started booking it back towards her house as fast as our legs would carry us. We heard one shout from the woman, a blood-curdling scream, but it sounded like it was fading in the distance, and soon she was gone. We never went back to the reservoir spot after that, and we only ever returned to the woods during the day. After that, the paths and the trails, they just no longer felt safe, and everything had a weird stillness or quiet about it. We no longer heard birds or bugs, and it never felt safe there again. We were 16 at the time that this happened, and I've long since moved from that village. I went off to college, in fact, living in a suburb and then to a large city, and I'm actually packing up to move out of state entirely. The house that I'm leaving is near a lake, and packing up my life has meant keeping some odd hours. And for the first time in, well, years, I found myself up at night and moving boxes into the garage. I stopped and I took a look at the lake on my way back to the house, but I froze because I could have sworn that I saw that same woman crawling on her belly, dragging herself up the side of the lake through the mud that sat on the edge. In an instant, she was gone, and I don't know what I saw, but it was creepy enough that I rushed back into the house instantly. I'm not sure what this means, but my aunt is coming to sage the house and our things after this. She's also insisting on doing it for our new place before we move anything in. And to be honest, I think I'm going to let her. I wanted to tell my best friend about all of this, but unfortunately she passed away a few years ago, and, well, that's another story entirely. This happened a few years ago. While I've never been a real skeptic, I guess, I never had an actual personal experience until this point. I could tell a dozen stories from that place, but hands down the scariest experience I've ever had is this. In 2021, I was working as a private investigator for a security firm, but would sometimes be called in to cover security guard posts. I was called in over a long holiday weekend, during which a factory was going to be shut down. I covered night shifts, and during shutdown, everything in the building was powered off. Lights, machines, everything save for things like security cameras, lights in the office, alarms, the boiler, and I think the Wi-Fi too. This was a huge factory. It took roughly an hour and a half to make one round, in fact, and the entire building was pitch black, so in order to do rounds we had mag lights, and the cell phone to scan barcodes near the doors to track our movements. We also had to write down the readings from several pressure valves on certain water risers. 2 of the risers were 10 feet apart, and behind 2 large pieces of machinery along a back wall. To get the readings, we couldn't hold both the mag light and the cell phone, so we had to use just the cell phone to navigate. On my first round, it had gone fine. No issues, everything secure, all doors are locked, everything accounted for. I had just started my second round and was getting the measurements from the risers. I got the first reading, turned to my left and was getting ready to walk the 10 feet to get the second, when a shadow appeared in front of me. It didn't really have a distinct shape, but was human height, and so black that I could distinguish it from the already pitch black of the factory. Before I could do anything, it flew directly at me, passing through my chest. And it was the most horrid, soul-deep, ice-cold feeling that I've ever had. I instantly collapsed on the floor, and while I don't know how much time had passed, I managed to call my boss at some point. Thankfully, he came and found me, called EMS, and while he obviously thought that I was nuts, this building had a reputation for paranormal activity and negative energy. It had ended the career of more than one guard, allegedly, so he knew something had happened. When EMS came, my vitals were all over the place. My heart rate was 180, while my blood pressure was only 74/40. I was in the hospital for a couple of days. But while I doubt he ever really fully believed me, my boss has seen me handle first responses after a tornado, an active shooter, and even a hostage situation with relative sanity intact. And even he admitted that whatever happened rattled me to my core. I don't know what it was, a demon, a reaper, or just some very angry spirit, but it was not friendly. To this day, just thinking about that experience gives me chills too, makes me sick to my stomach and really puts me on edge. At 32 years old, I still refuse to be in a pitch black room again because of what I experienced that night. First of all, let me start by saying that I'm just some regular guy who thinks that, yeah, spirits are real and I believe in God, but I never think about any of this stuff or am spooked by it either. If I hear a strange noise while sleeping, I ignore it and just carry on. I honestly pay it no mind and go about my days just normally, but something I witnessed about a year ago, it still bothers me until this day, and I randomly think about it from time to time. It was a regular day, and I was driving home at night like I always do. I'm going down a residential street that's about a few blocks from my home. I've driven down that street like maybe 1,000 times or more. Think of a 2-lane street each way, wide street with gated communities on both sides. I want to say it was around 9:30 at night. I was driving home from my son's baseball practice. My son was sleeping in the back seat. I make a right turn into that street and traffic was a lot lighter than usual. If I recall correctly, it was one car quite far away coming my direction and perhaps 1 or 2 cars in a distance behind me. So as I'm driving down the street, I notice what appears to be a person walking on the sidewalk on my right-hand side. He's walking towards the same direction that I'm driving, so I can only see his backside. And I say his because it had the body frame of a male, as it was tall, lanky, and medium hair that reached its shoulders. He was also wearing something like a black hat, skinny figure, black pants, black shirt. If I had to guess, maybe around 6'4", 6'5". I keep driving, and as I get closer to this person, perhaps around 20 to 25 feet away, I was suddenly completely stunned. This person turned around as it saw my lights approach, but in a very quick and vulgar way, like when somebody calls you over and over, and you turn around and say, "What?" Well, in that kind of way. And let me tell you that whatever it was not human. And no, it was not a mask. If it was a mask, it was more real than what CGI can do in movies nowadays. It was this monster-looking face, alone on a sidewalk in an empty street. It turned around, saw me, and stared at my car as I drove past it. I looked in my rearview mirror and it had stopped walking and just sort of stared. Immediately, my first reaction and thought to myself, aside from shock, was, "Dear Lord, what did I just witness?" And until this day, I still have no answer for it. So this happened about 5 years back. I was dating a girl who was prone to violent outbursts without warning. Her choice in decor was all dark and twisted paintings, a Satanistic Bible as her coffee table book of choice. At times, she was a very sweet and loving person, but would switch on a dime to her outbursts. She even once pulled a knife on me, cutting my hand when I tried to take it from her. One night, though, I was staying over. We were laying in bed watching movies and relaxing. I went downstairs to the kitchen to grab a drink from the fridge. The kitchen was dark, just lit up from the light above the stove. I opened the fridge door, reached down to grab my soda. When I stood back up and closed the door, starting to walk back, I was met with a shadow, not on a wall, but rather right in front of me. It was taller than I was. I kind of jumped back in fright, only to have it disappear in front of me. Walking back to the room, I was a bit confused and rattled, I guess. At first, I tried to play it off as my shadow, but the placement was just all wrong, let alone it not being on a wall. I get back into bed clearly shaken, not wanting to say anything. I didn't bring it up. But then she asked me what was wrong, and I said, "Nothing, I just got a bit of a fright." She replied with, "You saw it, didn't you?" I asked her what she meant by that, and in a very calm voice she just said, "The shadow guy." She claimed to have been seeing it most of her life, and it wasn't something to worry about, allegedly. Our relationship lasted 8 months in total, and a number of unexplained things happened in that house. However, that was the only time that I saw something directly. There were other instances of things happening, mostly when we would be fighting and screaming. From the sounds of footsteps coming from upstairs to one time hearing a loud crash from the upstairs bathroom. We went to investigate and found that all the soaps and the shampoo bottles in the shower, that they had found their way onto the floor despite being on tiled shelves. She never seemed worried or upset when these things would happen, which is a bit strange, I know, but still to this day, I really question what I saw that night. My children have been talking about seeing something in their room the last few weeks. This thing, they both described it as tall, lanky, grey-skinned with big black beady eyes. They described it as being surprised looking, but it's almost taking on features of people in the house. So, it is hairless, sometimes, but other times has long dark hair like myself. They said it's almost looking like one of the kids in facial structure, or their aunt who they look a lot alike. The first time my oldest saw it, she actually saw an arm come out of her closet and wiggle its long fingers, and after it was peeking around the closet at her, when she would look at it, it would duck back in. She's 16, so she was like, "Oh man, I must be tired." But my youngest, she hasn't been told anything so as not to scare her, saw the same thing looking over their door at her. My mum was over and we got into the subjects of ghosts one time, enthusiasts that we are. My oldest daughter brought up seeing something, and before she could even get it out, my younger child was like, "Did it look like this?" and proceeded to describe it in detail, and my oldest said yes. So I know that they are definitely seeing the same thing, but I honestly haven't the faintest idea of what it could be. I can't tell if it's something bad because, it hasn't really done much besides show itself, but they do hear whispers a lot in there, allegedly. So far, they say that it hasn't been seen outside of their room. It's only ever been seen in there, but I'm determined to get it out. I have to know what I'm dealing with first, obviously, but once I do, I'm going to try and get rid of it. So this may all seem insane or delusional, but I would really love to get someone's feedback on this, a second opinion at least. This entire thing is true, I can assure you that. I've never stopped thinking about it or wondering about this night too. So, in 2021, I moved into the house that I currently live in. I'm renting it. The house was built in the 1950s, from what I can gather through records. All seemed fine when we first moved in, except for the red room. Upstairs, there is a triangular attic-type space, painted completely red. It gave me terrible feelings of dread when I first walked into it. For months and months, I left it empty too. I wouldn't venture into it. My mother, who is a Christian but does not believe in ghosts, came to visit the house when we moved in. She walked into that room and said, "Oh my goodness, you should consider having our pastor come see this and pray," because she also got the dreadful feelings. Our bedroom is downstairs below that room, and at night, I would always hear like walking or creeping up there and lay awake sort of scared. But then it all went downhill. You see, as I got into bed one night, I heard an echo or young sort of female type voice whisper my name directly in my left ear. I froze and went completely cold. Waking up my partner in a panic, he shrugged it off. The next night, I heard the same voice, but coming from the next room, saying hi. I tried my best to ignore these things until one of the scariest nights that I've ever had. I was upstairs. My office is directly beside the red room, a door separating them. I was at my vanity taking off my makeup when the red room door slowly opened. Over the months, it would randomly open quite often, scaring me a bit, but my partner just blamed a draft, even though there wasn't one. But I tried to ignore that door. But that was when I heard loud footsteps downstairs walking around through the house. Assuming it was my partner at first, I finished my skincare and came down for bed. The whole house was dark, so I thought, that's weird. I mean, I just heard him walking around. I walked into the bathroom to pee, and as I passed the kitchen, I saw a tall, dark shadow-type figure walk past me. I could see it through the light coming through the windows. I assumed it was my partner. I even spoke out loud, saying, "Hey, I'll be in bed in a minute." After the bathroom, I walked to our room. Silent, because he was completely asleep. In a panic, I shook him awake, saying, "How long have you been asleep for? Weren't you walking around earlier and in the kitchen?" Through his sleepy demeanor, he said, "I've been asleep for what?" And he looked at his watch. 2 hours? And rolled back over. I went completely silent and cold again. I turned around to face where the kitchen was, and I saw nobody. But I was completely terrified by now. I quickly climbed into the covers and tried to wake him to tell him that we needed to check the house because somebody was in here. He didn't listen though and said to just go back to sleep. I turned my face and I saw a tall figure standing directly over him beside the bed on his side. At that, I couldn't hold it in anymore, and I let out a massive scream and grabbed him. This made him wake up, confused and asking, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I cried and said that I just saw a person again over him. And when I said that, he jumped up and checked our whole room, under the bed too. He said that there really isn't nobody here. He's a skeptic, always has been, never was afraid of the house. And well, that all changed once he got back into bed. We laid there, and as I finally started feeling less afraid and drifting to sleep, a loud bang like a stomp on the ground or dropping a brick was heard. The sound came from the floor on his side of the bed, right where I had seen the figure. He immediately was shaken from his sleep and screamed, "Okay, what the heck was that?" I could tell that he was afraid. I'd never actually seen him afraid. I started to panic, saying that I told you there was something there. Crying a little bit now, I really didn't know what to do. He immediately went around checking the entire house, making sure nobody had actually broken in. He got back into bed and I said, "You know that it wasn't a person, right?" He didn't know how to respond. This is all 100% true. It happened early last year in 2023. After this event, we moved our bedroom to another room across the house and turned the old one into a bonus room. Since moving our room, nothing has happened since, which is a bit bizarre. I wondered if the entity or whatever it was feeding off of me easily because I was sleeping directly below that red room. I'm not sure, but since then the only occurrence has been the red room door opening, the doorknob rattling a bit too. I now rebuke whatever it is when this occurs. I'm not the most religious, but I very loudly and firmly let it know that it's not welcome and it needs to leave me alone. So, I'm here to get your thoughts about what all of this could be and what you think that I should do about it. I generally consider myself a paranormal skeptic. I'm not religious and I have a hard time believing in ghosts. However, I like to entertain the idea. I enjoy ghost stories and movies, and I wouldn't rule out the paranormal altogether as an explanation for a situation that otherwise lacks an explanation. And this story falls into the latter category. This took place almost 20 years ago when I was around 15. I'm from a small town in the Midwest filled with plenty of older houses. One weekend, my parents took me with them to an open house at a house across town. It was a massive 2-story farmhouse built in 1840. It was at the very back of its property, maybe 5 acres, and surrounded by mature trees and plants. The land had been somewhat decently maintained, but the house hadn't had anyone living in it for a while. It wasn't dilapidated inside or out, and it could certainly be lived in immediately, but it needed some TLC. Think the house from Ghosts in the UK, but with more Berber carpet. The approach to the house was beautiful though, and had such a neat charm to it. We all really liked it. However, once we were in the house, I just felt, well, strange. This was an open house, so there were probably 4 or 5 other groups of people touring throughout, and despite that, it was just so strangely quiet. We toured all around, starting with the upstairs. There was such an odd vibe up there too. I kept feeling kind of dizzy and claustrophobic, even though it was a huge house. I was ready to leave after the weirdness upstairs, and from seeing the amount of maintenance that we'd have to do as well. But I was along for the ride, so we went down to the main level and looked all around. It felt a lot better down there, and I didn't get as uncomfortable as I did upstairs. Finally though, the real estate agent started funneling everyone down to the basement. The door was in the kitchen, and it led to the kind of basement that you'd probably imagine a house built in 1840 would have. Bare bulb hanging by a thread above the stairs, completely unfinished walls, dirt floor, and stairs that would be perfect to have your ankles grabbed from the other side. You know the ones. Well, we all went down to the basement as a group and looked around a bit. Really not much to see except for cobwebs and old wiring. I admit that it could have been the old horror movie basement influencing my opinion, but I felt super weird down there as well and was ready to leave. once everyone had their fill of looking around, we headed back up the stairs to the kitchen. I ended up being the very last person in the group, which meant that I was the last person up the stairs. Since the rest of the group was sort of loitering around in the kitchen, we had to slow down on the stairs so everyone could pass by. And I remember, clear as day, I was standing on the third step from the top, waiting to step into the kitchen and finally get out of this dang basement, when all of a sudden, my hair gets pulled from behind. I had or have short hair, and it felt like someone grabbed the hair right in the middle of my head and gave it a tug. My first thought was maybe I got my hair caught in something on the wall, so I looked all around for the offending object. But the only thing that I could have gotten my hair stuck in was a wall-mounted fire extinguisher, but I know that I was nowhere near it. At that, I made a beeline out of there, soon followed by my parents. When we got in the car, I told them what happened. We've talked about this story every now and then throughout the years, mostly in a wasn't that strange sort of way. It remained my favorite ghost story to tell, mostly since I don't have any other first-hand ones. The property, though, it was later sold to a local restaurateur, who sadly bulldozed a lot of trees and front lawn to build a new Italian restaurant. The house remained intact at the back of the property, and still does to this day. But fast forward around 4 years, I had moved to college and largely forgot about the hair-pulling thing. My mum called me and said that she had just had her mind blown and that she needed to share this. She had gone to a hair appointment with her stylist, and the topic of the Italian restaurant and house came up. She told my mum that there's allegedly an older female spirit that likes to mess with people, especially men, on the steps leading to the basement. She said this too without my mum having ever mentioned my experience to her. She had no idea that I had my hair pulled 4 years earlier. Of course, my mum proceeded to share my story from the open house with her, and I swear chills went down my spine. In fact, I'm getting chills even just sharing this. The house is still standing, and the Italian restaurant is still open as well. Part of me wants to go back to that house, but a much more sensible part of me wants, well, nothing to do with it. Anyway, if you've gotten this far, then thanks for listening. Growing up in rural Alaska, I experienced a lot of weird things, like amazing herds of caribou, strange weather, but the weirdest things to me are the times that I wasn't able to see the source of yelling or hollering. A lot of times I traveled alone throughout the Brooks Range and up into the North Slope to hunt and trap. From a young age, I learned how to hunt and field dress animals too, set up survival shelters, and even how to travel at night with the usage of the constellations like my ancestors before me. But these long and very arduous journeys sometimes brought me more than I was willing to endure. In the winter of 2017, I had a trap line along the left side of the valley headed northbound. The trap was set every few miles, and I was traveling along my trail when I saw a figure in a bunch of diamond willows ahead of me. The bunch of brush was about a mile or so away, but I could see the dark figure walking like a person. I wondered who would be out in January when it's the coldest time of the year just walking like this, when they just suddenly vanished. I looked out of my binoculars and scanned the area and just put it off as my imagination or someone with a snow machine, a snowmobile for you lower 48ers, and they had taken off along my trail or something. So I continued on. At my next trap, I stopped and shut off my machine. It was calm and surprisingly warm, for that time of year anyway, so I was able to shed my parka to reset the spring trap that I had come across. As I set the trap, I then started to hear a low, bellowing noise from up in the small valley. It came off like a person just yelling at first, but then it grew deeper, like a bear warning off another, but it was January. Nothing like that would be out and about. The most that you'd find would be wolves, maybe wolverines and caribou. Even moose tend to travel south for that time of the year. As I started to pack up, the noise began again though. It grew louder and louder, and I remembered that figure that I saw and wondered if they had anything to do with it. But I did my best to ignore the noise like my elders had taught me, and to just go about my business. But then, suddenly, I could feel eyes on me. I looked towards the valley where I felt the weird sensation, and there was nothing. I even pulled out my binoculars and looked, but nothing. I listened for the noise again, and when the bellowing began again, I responded this time. I did the same noise back at it, and it stopped quickly, like it recognized the noise that I made. Then, it got eerily silent. I was uneasy, so I packed up and I left as quickly as possible. And I haven't been back there since. I pulled the trapline that winter, and I do not plan on going back. A few years back, my now husband and I were living with my mum. My husband had started a new job where he was working 14-hour shifts and wouldn't get home until like 11 p.m. My brother liked to go out as well, so he also wasn't home. This meant that my mum and I were home alone on Halloween. We lived on a busy street, so we ran out candy around 9 p.m. My mum put a sign on the door and we went to bed. For some background too, we had 5 dogs in the house, and at this point my brother was about 21 years old and I was 22. My brother has a female German Shepherd Husky mix named Coco, and she's very good at reading our body language. Our screen door had a large window and it didn't lock, and our main door didn't have a view window. In other words, you couldn't really see outside. So the doorbell rings around 11:30 p.m. and I got up instantly and ran to the door. I stupidly assumed without a thought that it was my husband coming home from work. I opened the door without thinking, and there were 2 very large people wearing black hoodies and black sweats. I knew the screen door didn't lock, so I realized that this was a bad situation. My mum had heard the doorbell as well, so she was also walking to the door. My husband had the keys to the house, so my mum, having good instincts, realizing that it wasn't him, and decided to come with me to the door. I was stunned, to be honest, and didn't say anything, but my mum comes up from behind me and aggressively says, "Can I help you?" But before they could even speak, Coco jumped up at the glass and started barking and growling at them. When her paws pushed on the door, it opened slightly and the 2 people took a step back. They both just said trick or treat, and my mum said, "Don't you see the sign? We're out of candy." Then the 2 people walked away. My husband came home maybe 15 minutes later and we told him what happened. Coco for sure saved us from a pretty bad situation. She never acts that aggressively when people come to the door. But anyway, the next morning, we saw on the news a few blocks away that 2 people that matched the description of the 2 people that came to our door were shot and killed because they tried to rob the home of an off-duty police officer. The time of the incident was 30 minutes after the 2 people had come to our door. Often, I enjoy walking my dog at night time. This is mainly due to the fact that my dog is harder to walk when people are around with their own dogs. So, we tend to walk around parks in the area when they've become somewhat secluded, I guess. I'm also not a very big guy. I'm about 5'10" and pretty lanky, so I wouldn't call myself an intimidating figure. However, my 120-pound black boxer lab named Loki could be somewhat considered threatening to most from what I hear. I figured that his size would be used as a deterrent for anyone looking to cause nightly troubles. But man, I was dead wrong. You see, on one specific night in the fall of 2016, I can recall an encounter that reminds me of why I'm so reluctant to walk around once daylight falls. This specific park is one that I've been to a couple of times, and from what I remember, this park is usually secluded around 6:30 and later. Aside from a couple of joggers or very few other dog walkers, not many people walk the same path that I take. I also like to put on my headphones and just listen to music while I'm walking. But on this specific night, I chose not to wear them since my phone was on low battery and I wanted to preserve it as long as I could. Anyway, the walk was going pretty much as usual, I would say. Loki did his business and we continued on our usual path. About midway on our walk, I realized that it had started to get really dark. But since he was done with his business too, I decided to cut the walk somewhat short and we took a shortcut that kind of led us off the path. The path had a bunch of trees surrounding the area and there were still leaves on the branches. With that being said, I felt a weird feeling as if I was being watched. I have pretty bad anxiety sometimes, but since I knew the town was safe, I knew that nothing was going to really happen. But still, I could not for the life of me shake off the feeling of being watched. I peered back to see if anyone had been following me out of anxiety, and every single time, nobody was there. In fact, nobody was anywhere. This whole shortcut was essentially secluded. But suddenly, Loki stopped walking and also looked back. I told him, "Loki, come on boy, we gotta go, man." One thing I failed to mention was that Loki is a big coward. I noticed his tail was tucked between his legs, which is a telltale sign that a dog is afraid. I'll admit too that I was a little curious and still a bit nervous, but I didn't want to find out what he had heard or noticed, that's for sure. I just wanted to get out ASAP. I pulled a little and he began to walk, but every now and then I would see him peer back. After maybe a minute or so of walking, he stopped again and this time he began to growl. Now, despite being a coward, Loki is a bark but no bite kind of dog, so I took this chance to see exactly what he was growling at. It was quite dark, so I couldn't really see well, so I used my phone's flashlight to see what was up. Trees. Just trees. Which means that what he heard was probably just some kind of an animal, right? Once again, I turned around and I kept walking. He continued to peer back once in a while still, but this time I noticed that it was a lot more frequent. I just said to myself, must just be squirrels or maybe a bird, and I ignored it. But then, I heard what happened to be actual footsteps and branches breaking, and there is absolutely no way a small animal could have produced a sound like that. Loki turned around quick and, still with his tail tucked, he began to growl and bark at a figure that I could only describe as a man in his early 50s, possibly late 40s, appear from out of the woods. He was dressed in dirty clothing, his hair was long and was graying, he had one hand in his pocket, and he said to me, "Nice dog you have here, kid. What breed is he?" He's a boxer lab," I replied. "Oh, I love dogs. Mind if I pet him?" He wandered over. The man got closer and emerged from the trees, and as he got closer, I realized that he was quite tall and pretty burly too. Loki instantly got bad vibes, and he ran behind me and started to bark at him. Actually, I do kind of mind, man. My dog here doesn't really like strangers. Sorry, but it's probably not the best to pet him, I quickly stated. "Oh, it's okay, man. Really. He seems like a really friendly guy. Just a little pet wouldn't harm him, right?" the man retorted as he got closer. I felt extremely uncomfortable as he appeared to get closer and closer with every step. I don't know why this guy just couldn't take no for an answer. I mean, I usually don't allow people to even pet Loki unless he comes up to them first. If he's scared of you, then I usually do not want him to freak out by letting him be pet by a stranger. This is especially the case when said stranger came from the woods behind trees. I'm really sorry, man. I'm scared that he bites you or something, I told him as I began to walk away. Like I said before, I wasn't trying to be judgmental or anything, but the dude literally came out from the woods and was possibly the one trailing us from before. I don't know why you won't just let me introduce myself to him, man, the guy replied, angrily. This time, I began to speed walk. I was very uncomfortable and my fight or flight instincts began to take over. He followed us too and also kept muttering curses to himself. I don't know if this man was like under the influence or something, but he just did not let up. I won't lie too, I started to get a little bit angry myself. I mean, why can't a guy just take no for an answer? He began to match my speed, almost as if he was trying to catch up to us as well. Loki and I both took this as an answer to start sprinting as fast as we could. To be honest too, I really don't remember much of the running. It was all a bit of a blur to me, but I do remember the spine-tingling feeling of hearing his footsteps rapidly increasing behind me. For a man of his stature, he was quite fast as well. I also realized pretty quickly that his intentions may not have just been to pet my dog. No one reasonable would go that far just to pet a dog that clearly wanted nothing to do with them, right? I looked behind me and he was now in pursuit. And maybe about 10 feet behind me he was chasing us. I'll never forget the look in his eyes too. I've never had anyone look at me like that. A look of killer intent. And all for what? Just because he couldn't pet my dog? My instincts told me that he definitely had sinister intent behind that. But finally, the path led back to the park exit and into the busier streets. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park. I made sure nobody was following me, and I even made sure to walk on the populated streets this night. After what seemed like an eternity, we finally got home, but I knew for a fact that I was not going to get a minute of sleep that night. From my window in the porch, I watched pretty much all night with Loki, just to see if anyone had followed us home. I also made a police report with my parents. After all, this guy seemed to have been quite suspicious, and who knows what his true intentions were. Had his target been someone who couldn't protect themselves or run away like I did, what would he have done? I also often ask myself, what if I had worn my headphones that night and the sound of music drowned the footsteps behind me? Ever since, I haven't walked Loki in that park, and I've also made it a habit of mine to walk on livelier streets at night. If I could give anyone one piece of advice, even if you live in a relatively safe town, never, ever let your guard down. You just never know what kind of person might be lurking in the shadows, or, as in my case, within the trees. When I was in my early 20s, I went through a really dark time. All of my friends had moved away and I'd gone through a traumatic breakup. I was also stuck in a town that I didn't like. I was in school and couldn't leave, and I was living with my sister in an old shanty house. I was super depressed, and I think the energy that I was putting out alienated me from my peers. I've always been sensitive and interested in the occult. I started reading books on chaos magic and Grant Morrison's pop magic. I began making up rituals and got really into spiritualism, and I used candle magic, would write messages on the candles, and would use my blood sometimes. I always protected myself and had rosemary and different crystals on hand. But I started having really vivid dreams of, and I know this sounds weird, but bear with me, a wolf spirit named Jenny. We would sit atop mountains in my dreams and drink tea and talk, and I asked her what she was, but she would never answer my questions. I dreamt about her almost every night in fact, and it got to the point where I even saw her shadow once or twice in my waking state, I think. Anyway, one night I did a pretty powerful ritual, I guess you could say. And while I thought that I was coming from a good and positive place, I had a lot of sadness in my heart. That night, when I was trying to sleep, I just had the worst feeling too. I felt like a million eyes were watching me and my stomach was in knots. I was so scared that I turned the light on and tried to go back to bed. But 5 minutes later, the light bulb in my room literally burst. I was in the dark again and I saw something. It was white and translucent and sort of looked like it was made of fine lace. Whatever it was, it flew from one side of my room to the other, and I was so scared at this point that I decided to crawl into my sister's bed. She was sound asleep and I slept at the foot of her bed. 5 a.m. comes along and my sister wakes me up. She's really startled for some reason, and she tells me that she dreamt of a wolf that was telling her to get up and walk outside. This wolf kept insisting that she get out of her bed and leave the house. And she ended up waking up standing at her car, keys in hand. She had apparently sleptwalked, something she had never done before, and she had no idea that I'd been sleeping at the foot of her bed, and was startled when she walked back into her room and saw me. Mind you, I had never told her about Jenny, so it's crazy that she dreamt of a creature that looked so similar and was trying to coax her away from me. After that happened, I stopped playing with magic, and after a while the dreams of Jenny stopped too. But I still wonder about all of this. I still wonder about what she was. If any of you have had any similar things happen or could give me some insight, I would really appreciate it. I've read a lot about all of this stuff, but who knows? Maybe I'm missing something. So I, a 22-year-old female, live in a brand new apartment complex on a nice side of town. My city is pretty safe in general. This is the first time that I've lived alone. So, even though it is a safe area, I took some precautions, which included installing a Ring video doorbell. I have honestly never needed it in the 6 months that I've lived here, so no unexpected visitor has ever come by. That is, until last night. I was sitting at home alone with my dog, working on some homework. It was nearly 8 p.m. and starting to get dark. At night, I have my Ring set up to alert me when any person is detected outside of my door. And I received a notification of motion at my door, but I didn't think much of it. At 8 p.m., people are still walking down the hall and up the stairs, etc. About 30 seconds later, though, I received several loud knocks on my door and my Ring is pushed rapidly 3 times. At this point, I was a little bit spooked and my dog is going nuts as well. I open up the app to see 2 men standing outside of my door. I sort of debated internally on if I should open it or not, but then decided since it wasn't quite dark yet and my neighbors were home, that it would be safe to do so. I sort of slowly open the door, just enough to put my head out. The man nearest to me says that they are with the Wealth Committee and complimented my wreath. He then went on to say that he was with an internet company and he and his partner were here to offer me a deal. Now, my apartment has a very strict no-tolerance policy for solicitation of any kind. We are told to immediately report that kind of activity, and there are signs posted all around stating that solicitation is prohibited by law here. I told the men that I'm happy with my current service and was not interested in switching. The man who spoke first continued to speak about the great deal that they were offering. I continued to decline, and he kept saying that he lived really close to here and he'd be happy to personally set up the service. He even offered to come inside and help me get started immediately. Obviously, I declined his offer once more, and he reiterated that if I changed my mind to give him a call because he could be here in 5 minutes to help me out. He handed me a business card, and I tried to end the conversation again, but he then tells me that he just can't walk away knowing that I could get such a good deal and I'm saying no to it. At that point, my instincts were telling me something was off. I decided to take a more aggressive approach, I guess you could say, and I asked him if he was aware that my apartment has a strict no solicitation policy. He said that he was aware, but that he cleared it with management. My apartment actually has a very small management team, and I know every single one of them. So I asked who he had cleared it with, and he said that he cleared it with the guys on the golf cart, Mike and Will, and that Mike was a great guy. And now I knew that it was all a lie. Our management team is only women here. There is nobody by the name of Mike or Will. In fact, only one man works here, and his name is Joe. I say, thanks, but I'm not interested, and close the door and lock it loudly. I took a closer look at the business card that he handed me, and it had a logo and the name that he gave me, but the email was not a company email. It was a Yahoo account. The phone number also did not appear when I searched it up for the company. I decided to post about my encounter in the residents-only Facebook page, and a few other women commented that they had had similar interactions tonight, but that they were given different names, and the strange thing was, none of the men of the couples were approached. It was only women that they spoke with. They talked to my upstairs neighbor, I think, and my neighbors across the hall, both girls, and didn't speak to either of the men that live on the same floor as me. Everyone was also given different names, and everyone was offered vastly different deals. 2 women were told that they didn't have business cards to hand out. I thought that it might be worth Googling this guy's name to see if anything popped up as well. And sure enough, the second result was a report on an offender registry. Turns out, the man who spoke at my door has 5 felonies and has served several years in jail for various charges, including trafficking a controlled substance, theft by deception, and possession of stolen property. I knew that it was him too because there was a photo attached to the report. He's currently on parole until November apparently, but I'm not sure if I'm overthinking this situation, because this is my first time experiencing something like this, but I know it didn't feel right, that's for sure. Maybe I'm just being dramatic or paranoid, but the entire thing feels more than a little bit off. I'm not sure if they were just scammers or if they were staking out places to rob, or maybe worse, who knows, but I reported it to my property manager who was investigating it today. I'm just a bit uneasy about the whole thing, I guess. If they return, I'll be calling the police for sure. As of the time of sharing this, nothing else suspicious has happened, thankfully, and I'm safe at the moment, but I'll continue to stay vigilant. Be safe out there, guys. So I'm a bit of a skeptic of the supernatural, and I've never put much stock into ghosts or spirits. I do think aliens are real and rationally could exist through biological processes. My kids have had, well, experiences in each house that we've lived in, though. I always wrote it off as overactive imagination, but for a little over a year now, my youngest son has been talking to us about the baby in his room. He's only 2 and will be 3 soon. So, it started when he first started talking. He would wake up screaming for us, saying that the baby in his room was trying to get him. He would be terrified and would take a long time to get him calmed and back to sleep. My wife and I, we just sort of wrote this off as being overstimulated by something that he saw on TV. He seemed to calm down, only mentioning his friend every so often, but he stopped waking up terrified, so we thought that we were past it. Here lately, though, as he's gotten more articulate, he's bringing up details out of nowhere that we're having a hard time explaining. Things like the description of this thing, its favorite things, and where it comes from and how it comes in the room. Some of these details, we cannot figure out how he would get this info. Like, the baby is naked, smaller than him, and it can fly with wings. Its favorite food is dates and likes to drink milk. We're a middle-class white family, and the only time that I've ever heard of dates was in Indiana Jones, which he's never seen. He says it flies into his room from the windows and talks to him. He refuses to elaborate on what it wants and what they talk about. He says that it lives in the woods and it is never present during the day, like when he's playing with his toys. Which, if it was an imaginary friend, I would have thought that he'd be playing with it when he was playing. I'm coming here because I'm starting to see things that I can't explain and hear things that just do not make sense as well. Like, last week, I was out doing yard work and had been playing with a clothes hanger, like a grappling hook sort of thing. And when I came back inside through the front door, I found the hanger standing up by itself about 2 feet away from the door. He was upstairs playing and nobody was around it, and I thought that it was strange and asked my wife how the heck he did that, picked it up and put it away. The next day, as I was walking from my kitchen to the bedroom, I saw motion out of my peripheral. It was moving fast, and when I turned my head, I saw a shadow figure flying near the ceiling, going from the bar into the kitchen, past a hanging light fixture, and through the wall just above the glass door leading to the deck. And the best way that I can describe it is, it was a lot like a fairy. It was about 8 inches tall with butterfly-like wings. The top wings were sort of lobed, but the bottom wings were kind of pointed. At this point, I turned around to my wife to ask if she just saw that. She had her back to it though, so unfortunately she didn't see anything. After this incident, I reconsidered the clothes hanger. I tried for nearly an hour to make this thing stand up. I was hoping that it was curved or bent in a way to make it stand up, or there was a spot in the hardwood floor that was perfect for it to nestle in or something, but I just could not replicate it no matter how hard I tried. I asked my son what he did, or if he even did it, and he said that he sang to it and his friend made it stand up. The only thing that I know about fairies is from movies, and I believe in things that could possibly exist, like aliens or Bigfoot, I suppose. I don't think spirits are real, but all of this is definitely making me reevaluate things a bit, and everything that I've researched about these things from folklore is definitely not pleasant. Anyway, I guess I'm here to try and get some answers, and I'm wondering if any of you guys have seen anything similar or have had any experience with this type of thing. If you have or do know anything, then please do drop a message below, because I'm a bit freaked out. So, I'm a server at a local restaurant in Texas, and today I had a table that struck me as just really odd. It was a man who appeared to be in his early 30s and a girl who looked maybe around 8 or 9. I understand that different families have different dynamics, but almost everyone, including married couples, wants separate dishes when sharing a salad. However, this grown man and child ate out of the same really small bowl, huddled close together, which I found strange. The girl wouldn't really look at me, and the man did all the talking, which is not particularly out of the ordinary, but she was huddled down and hiding her face. The kids can be shy though, but most of them at least sit up straight. I sort of mentioned it to the bartender that I found the man creepy, and he basically told me to write it off or ignore it, so I did. I pretty much ignored the bad feeling in my gut, the feeling that everyone says to listen to, right? After the two of them left, I walked over to their table to look at the receipt and see how much they tipped me. However, my attention was immediately caught by writing at the bottom. Along the bottom left portion of the receipt was written, "I think you're very pretty, miss," with a smiley face next to it. Then along the bottom it said, "Not my dad." All of the writing appeared to be in a different sort of handwriting than whoever wrote the tip. I found this really weird, and I showed it to the management and they said to ignore it. My boss said that the girl may have written the note to say that I was pretty and then added on the last part to specify her dad, the man that I assumed was her dad, didn't think that. But I don't know. I have no idea, and it's not really my business, I suppose, but this entire interaction and the receipt gave me such a bad feeling, and I'm still kind of creeped out by it. I mean, it's entirely possible that the letter is just harmless. But then again, the "not my dad" part may be specifying that this little girl is in trouble. I'm not sure if I should report it or not, or even be concerned, but I figured that I would share it here and see what you guys think.